I graduated from high school 2 years ago. I remember that during my senior year, there was a really weird thing that happened that I still think about sometimes. I drove to and from school every day. I got a job when I was 16 and over time saved up enough money to buy a car. Sure, it wasn't nice, but when I became a high school senior, I was finally able to drive myself to school and not rely on the bus anymore. This was especially nice for me because I lived almost 15 minutes away from my high school and riding the bus would take forever. I would have to ride the bus for almost an hour to get to school because of how many people we would pick up along the way. Plus, I had to be up by 6:30 to catch the bus. Anyways, shortly after I got the car, just a couple of weeks into the school year, I left to go home one day. When school got out, the parking lots were always extremely busy. It was just like leaving a sporting event right after a big game. You'd be stuck in traffic trying to get out of the parking lot for a good 5 minutes. I would always try to beat the traffic, but rarely did. On this day, I got done with my 5th hour class, then quickly dropped off my book at my locker, got my keys, and headed for the parking lot. I got to my car, started it up, and left. I sat in traffic for a minute or two, leaving the parking lot, and then finally was on the road. It would be pretty smooth sailing from that point on, but like I said, it was almost a 15-minute drive. When I had first pulled out of the parking lot, there was another car that pulled out right after me. I remember noticing it because it didn't stop before exiting, it just left right after me. As I was driving home, it wasn't until I was more than halfway back that I realized that the same car was still right behind me. I wondered which one of my classmates this was. Maybe it was one of my friends, except most of my good friends' cars I would recognize. I didn't recognize this one at all. As I got closer to my house, I was getting more and more curious. Whoever it was must live pretty close to me. I really couldn't see in their driver's window when I looked in my mirror. Eventually, I made it to my street and turned onto it. The car behind me did as well. I was really surprised to see this. Then I got to my driveway and pulled into it. When I did, the car behind me continued to drive down the street past my house. My street was usually pretty quiet, and I knew that nobody else from my high school lived on it, so I wasn't quite sure who had been seemingly following me back. Still, I just went inside after that. I made some food like I usually did after getting home and forgot all about it. I remember that I stayed up sort of late that night playing video games. I was inside my bedroom, and it was probably like midnight when I noticed a car driving down the street out of the corner of my eye. I didn't think anything of it, but then I noticed that this car was stopping on the side of the road right in front of our house. I paused my game and glanced over. The car was just sitting there on the side of my street, right there. After not seeing anybody get out, I walked closer to my window and looked. Then, I realized it was the same car that had followed me home from school earlier in the day. I got sort of suspicious. I kept watching it, and eventually saw the engine turn off. Then, the driver's door opened and a man got out. I didn't recognize the guy at all. It certainly wasn't a high school student, though. The guy looked like he was going to walk right into our front yard. Then, he noticed me. We made eye contact for a brief moment. When we did, the guy just turned around and walked back into his car. The engine started up and he drove away. I kept watching from the window after that for quite some time. I never saw him again. I really think that guy must have been planning to break into our house or something that night, but when he saw me watching him, he thought better of it. Other than that, I don't know what he was doing. Why he was at my school though, and why he chose to follow me home, I don't know either. This happened just a couple of years ago. I was in college at the time, but went to a smaller school. I have a good friend group from high school, and we remain close to this day, but several of us went to different colleges. A few went to a much bigger school, which was a little bit more fun to hang out at. It was only about an hour away from the college that I went to, so on a few occasions, I went and visited for a weekend. I remember that one time, during I believe my 3rd year of college, I went to visit 2 of my friends, Jake and Sam, at the larger school. I went down on Friday after classes and hung out with my friends later that day. We were going to go to the university football game the next day on Saturday. But before that, on Friday night, my friends and a few of their college friends were going out to some of the local bars. We left to go there at probably like 10 p.m., and we decided to walk because I was told it would only take about 10 minutes. I was with Jake and Sam to start, but Sam soon left us because he said he had to stop and get something at one of his friends' dorms quick, so he would meet us there. Our route to getting there went right through the center of campus. Now, I had been there a couple of times in the past, but this school was very large, and I didn't know the campus all that well. At this hour, things were dark, and really nobody else was around, other than some people on the main sidewalks. We took a shortcut through a courtyard near some buildings, which I assumed had classrooms in them, but I wasn't really sure. I suddenly really had to use the bathroom, and when we passed by a building, I asked Jake if I could use the bathroom in one of the buildings. He was like, "Sure, go ahead." I didn't really know what the buildings were or if they would be locked, but when I went to the door and tried it, it was open. Jake then got a phone call and he stayed outside. I told him that I would be right back and I entered the building. When I got inside, there were a few hallways and a lounge type of area. I didn't know exactly what type of building it was still. Nobody else seemed to be inside. There was no bathroom in immediate sight, so I started walking around to try and find one. I kept expecting one to be right around the corner or really close by, but there just wasn't one. At last, after probably 5 minutes of wandering around the building, I found a bathroom. I used it and was back out in less than a minute, but now I didn't really know how to get back. I thought that I knew the way and started going there, but I soon heard footsteps coming. They were walking kind of fast in my direction. I didn't know if I was even supposed to be in here, and I wasn't a student at the school, so I decided to wait out of sight. I went back around the corner, hoping for the footsteps to pass by. Instead of passing me though, they turned the corner and headed to where I was. In a split-second decision, I moved back and went up a staircase, which happened to be right there. After walking up, I was now a floor higher, and everything looked mostly the same on the second floor, but I heard the footsteps starting to walk up the stairs. They were also moving faster than before. Somebody seemed to be after me for some reason. I started to worry that I really wasn't supposed to be in this building and would get in trouble. I walked as fast as I could without running through a random hallway. I was trying to make my way back towards the entrance and find another staircase or something. When I went down a couple more hallways, I heard the person behind me go down each way that I went. They were still a ways back though and couldn't see me. I didn't know who this person was that was chasing me. I kind of thought that it was silly and I considered just stopping and seeing who it was, but for some reason I just felt like that wasn't a good idea. For some reason I felt like I was maybe in danger. I kept walking, changing hallways every so often. I tried going in a random room at one point, but it was locked. Then I came up on an elevator. I decided to take it and push the button. Thankfully, it opened immediately. If I would have had to wait, I probably would have just moved on. I got inside and started pushing the button for the first floor over and over. Meanwhile, I heard the footsteps coming from down the hallway. They were moving faster and faster, and then they started running. Whoever this was now sprinting towards me. Finally, the elevator doors started to close. At about that same time, the person had entered the hallway that I was in. The doors just barely closed on time. When they were maybe an inch open, I heard whoever it was get right outside and then just barely saw them. I couldn't tell anything about them though, just that they were right outside. They grabbed at the door, but it was too late. I felt a huge wave of relief as the elevator started moving down. But at this same time, I heard the person sprinting away from the elevator. I was guessing that they were now going to the nearest staircase. When the elevator door opened, to my surprise, I could see the exit. I think it was the same door that I had gone in. I turned to the right and started walking. That's when I heard footsteps coming from a ways to the left. Whoever it was that was chasing me was almost down the stairs. That's when I started to run. I sprinted towards the exit and heard the other person sprinting in my direction now. Just when I was about to get to the door, I saw something go flying past my head and I heard a loud smash. Whoever this person was had thrown a small lamp at me. It just missed my head and hit the wall just a couple of feet away. I opened up the door and sprinted outside. My friend Jake was still on the phone, but a ways down, probably like 50 feet. He saw me running and looked confused. But as I was approaching him still, I saw the look on his face as he saw somebody come barreling out of the building behind me. Then he started running with me. We were both pretty fast, and now that we were outside, had many more options on where to run. We quickly made a right and ran a ways, then made it to another street. When we did, we finally stopped and realized that the person wasn't chasing us anymore. Jake asked me what that was all about, and I told him that I didn't know. We were able to meet up with our other friends after that, but I felt really lucky to have made it out of that situation okay. I really don't know who that person was. The crazy thing is that I never even saw them. Jake told me that it was a man, and he said that he didn't get a real good look at him, but he said the guy looked insane. I will take his word for it. The fact that the guy threw a lamp at me is really bad. It could have injured me, and I'm glad that the guy didn't catch up with me either. Who knows what he would have done? I also feel like the guy was not supposed to be in the building. I didn't see him for the rest of the time that I was there that weekend. Since then, I've been back at that college a couple of times, but I will never forget that experience.
For some background of this story, I am a female, and this took place about 5 years ago during my junior year of high school. It was sometime in the first semester, and I was in my 5th hour class, which was drawing. They held all of the art classes at the oldest wing of the school, which had a different feel from the rest of it, and was kind of isolated from other parts of the school because it was only connected through one hallway at the end. It was darker and colder, and needed some updating from the chalkboards in the rooms to the old-fashioned lights. People would often start rumors that the wing was haunted, but I never believed them. On this day, when I was in class, I finished my drawing pretty early, and I knew that I would just be sitting there for the rest of the period, so I asked my teacher if I could go to the bathroom. She was a nice teacher and always said yes. I knew she didn't really care how long I was gone, as long as I made it back before the bell. I walked out of the classroom and down the hall and went to the girls' bathroom. This bathroom in the hallway also had an old-fashioned theme to it. It was near the end of the hall, and you had to go around a small corner to get to it. I'm not gonna lie, it was a kind of creepy bathroom, but I always liked it because other people rarely used it. Once inside, I went into one of the stalls. I was in there for maybe 20 or 30 seconds when I heard the bathroom door open and shut. I was a little surprised to hear somebody else coming in here at this time, and I looked underneath the stall to see some old rundown boots with black pants. Obviously I couldn't see much, but it didn't really look like a girl based on those shoes. There were several stalls in that bathroom, and I expected the person to go into one of them, but instead I heard them walk slowly closer and closer to me. As they did, I got a little bit uncomfortable. Then they stopped just in front of the stall that I was in. I could see through the cracks of the stall just barely who it was. It appeared to be a grown man. When I looked, he seemed to be looking through the stall right back at me. I didn't recognize him at all, and I knew he wasn't supposed to be in here. Then he tried opening the door, which of course I had locked. I sat there in shock, and my heart started pounding extremely fast. I was thinking of what I would do if he broke into the stall, and I knew I would have to try to get away from him. But after trying the door, the man stood there for a moment and then walked away slowly. I started to feel relieved, but instead of leaving the bathroom, the man just stopped in front of the exit and stood there. I could see his shoes on the floor, just standing in front of the exit, blocking the doorway. I waited for a few moments, hoping he would leave, but he just remained standing there next to the door. I decided to pull out my phone and text some of my friends who went to school with me. They were all in other classes, but finally I reached my friend David, who was on the football team, and he said he would come down and see what the man was up to. I was relieved once again when he said he was on his way, and I figured it would only take him a couple of minutes to arrive. The whole time that I waited, the man just kept standing there by the door. Just then, out of nowhere, all of the lights in the bathroom went off. It went completely dark in there, and I couldn't see a thing. I started to panic and braced myself for the man possibly trying to open the stall door again. Finally, at last, I heard the door open and heard the voice of my friend David. He said my name, and then he turned the lights back on. I heard some commotion, and I opened the stall door. I saw David leaving the bathroom behind the man. The man ended up running out of the school through an exit which was nearby. I saw David run to the exit and go outside, but he came back in shortly after and said that when he got outside, he didn't see anybody at all. I returned to class and reported the incident. I ended up having to talk to the principal, and those bathrooms ended up getting blocked off the next week.
This story takes place a few years ago when I first started college as a freshman. I was at a pretty big school, but I didn't know anybody there. I was 4 hours away from home and in a different state. I lived on one of the freshman dorm buildings and on the 5th floor, which was the top floor. On what was the first week of classes, I got ready for bed one night to go to sleep. All of the lights were off in my room and it was pitch black. I had just set my alarm and closed my eyes to try to fall asleep when suddenly I heard my door open. I quickly opened my eyes and looked over my shoulder to the doorway. My room was still very dark, other than just a little bit of light now coming in because of the door being opened. I saw there was someone standing in the doorway, holding open the door. I couldn't tell at all who it was though, because of how dark it was. All I saw was just a figure. I didn't know anybody at this school yet, so I figured somebody must be here by accident. I called out asking them who they were, but they didn't answer me. I then said to them, "I think you have the wrong room." They still didn't answer me. Instead, I saw the figure suddenly move into my room instead of leaving, and then shut the door behind them and lock it. It was now completely dark once again, and I couldn't see anything at all. Everything went completely silent after that. Within a few seconds of this, I was beyond creeped out and started reaching around for my phone, which I had placed on my desk to charge. As I was doing this, I suddenly felt my right arm being grabbed by someone. I jumped up and off my bed and yanked my arm away as fast as I could. I then yelled as loud as I could for them to get away from me. I ran for the direction of the door and slammed into it, banging my shoulder pretty hard. I felt around for the lock and then unlocked the door and opened it. I then ran out into the hallway and found my RA's room and knocked on their door. Luckily, they were still awake. I told them what had happened, and now that I wasn't alone, I felt better about going back to my room to confront whoever was there. We both walked there and then opened the door, ready for anything. I turned on the light, and we both saw that the room was now empty. I guess whoever had been in there somehow left. I don't know how they would have left though, because I was in the hallway the entire time. There was really nothing else to do at that point, other than to tell my story to the RA, who said he would inform the school. I always made sure my door was locked after that, and didn't have another problem. However, I always wonder who did that to me, and why. When I was in high school, I was really into sports. I played on the football, basketball, and baseball teams. This took place during my senior year and after a basketball game one night. I loved weightlifting and would work out in the school weight room all the time. I remember we had a basketball game at 7 that night, which ended at about 9 p.m. After the game, my coach would always stick around for a while in his office. On this night, we went back to the locker room and coach talked to us like always. I remember that we won the game, and after coach was done, the guys started changing and leaving. I told coach that I was going to go lift, and he said that was fine. So I left the locker room and then went over to the weight room. It was kind of on the other side of the school though, in another wing. The weight room was kind of tucked away, and you had to walk past these janitor's closets to get there. So I went inside the weight room and started lifting. It was nice because it was just me all by myself in there. I was really focused on getting in as good of shape as I could at that point, because I was going to be playing football in college the next year. So I worked out in there for probably 40 minutes or so. Then I was going to go back to the locker room, shower, and drive home. By now, everybody in the school was gone except for my coach and the night janitors. I believe there was 2 overnight janitors, and I knew who both of them were because of my many late nights at the school. After exiting the weight room, I passed by one of the janitor's closets. I'm not sure why, but I looked in. I saw what appeared to be a man hiding inside, sort of behind some stuff. After passing it, I stopped where I was and was thinking, did I really just see that? I almost went back to look, but realized whoever this guy was would know that I saw him then, so I decided to just keep walking instead. I was going to find one of the night janitors and let them know that I saw a guy hiding in one of their closets. The locker room was still a ways away, which was also where the coach's office was. But before I was even out of the first hallway, I heard footsteps behind me. I knew it was the guy who I had seen, but I had no clue as to who he was. The school was completely silent by this time, so I easily heard the guy walking behind me. I reached the end of that hallway and then took a right. Then when I was going down that hallway, I continued to hear the guy behind me. I couldn't seem to find any of the janitors, and whoever was following me was starting to get closer. At that point, I decided to just leave. I walked down another hallway to the closest exit. When I got there, I left the school. After making it outside, the man behind me did not follow. I had to walk all the way around the school to the side door, but that was also locked. Luckily, I had my phone and I called my coach and told him what happened. He came to the side doors and let me in. Then I was able to get back to the locker room and change and get my stuff. My coach told me he would go to see who the guy was in the school and that I should just go home. So I left. After that though, I never heard what ended up happening. Maybe the guy left the school as well. I'm not sure what he was doing in there. Or why he was following me.
In May of 2018, I was a senior in high school. It was getting towards the end of the school year, and some of us seniors planned out a senior prank. We'd made a group chat with a few of us and planned to fill the senior hallway with red Solo cups. It was a pretty innocent prank. The plan was for me and my friends Tony and Derek to be the ones to set it up. We knew of the perfect time to do it, which would be late at night when nobody else was at the school. The three of us met at the school at about midnight. Tony knew of a back window that didn't close properly, and we were able to sneak through it and into a classroom. We then walked to the senior hallway. Our school was not all that big, and it didn't take us long to get there at all. Tony and I had backpacks filled with cups, as well as an additional bag. It was strange to be in our high school so late at night. It was so empty that it had an eerie feeling. We took the cups and began setting them up. We knew it was going to take some time, but with the three of us, it actually went by pretty quickly. When we had completed about 15 to 20 feet of the hallway, we started to hear a noise coming from around the corner of the senior hall. Because we had the cups set up, we couldn't walk past them to see what the noise was, but we didn't really want to either. Nobody was supposed to be in the school at this hour, but we thought maybe a janitor was working really late for some reason. When we heard the noise, we ran and hid behind a nearby wall. We considered just leaving, but we didn't hear the noises for a while, and the other seniors were counting on us to complete this prank, so we decided to take the risk and go back to work. We kept going and didn't hear any more noises until just when we were about to finish. It was the clear sound of footsteps coming from the same spot as before. We were glad to be done and wanted to leave, but before heading out, we paused and looked over to where the noise was. Then we saw a man appear. He was short and was wearing a black sweatshirt and appeared to be in his late 20s. He just stood there staring at us with a blank look on his face. We knew he definitely did not work at the school, and the three of us decided to take off for the exit. We were able to quickly leave the school and ran all the way back to our cars. The next day when we showed up to school, all of the red Solo cups were messed up and scattered across the hallways. We didn't tell anybody about the man that we had seen because we didn't want the school to know we had done the prank, especially after how it turned out. I assumed that the man left the school because we never heard anything more about it, but I still wonder sometimes what he was doing in there.
I'm going to tell you a story that happened back when I was in high school. This was during my junior year. My name is Kendall, and when I was in high school, I would describe myself as a pretty average student. I had a friend group of a few other people that I would talk to on a regular basis. The high school that I went to was relatively big. I'm not sure exactly how many students went there total, but it was probably over 1,000. Most of my classes, I would have at least one of my friends in it, but not quite all of them. I remember there was this one science class that I was in during the first semester of junior year, and I didn't really have any friends in it. This meant that when we did group projects, which we did a lot, I would just have to kind of join a group that I was sitting near. That's when I met this one guy named Ronnie. Ronnie was in a group that I was in with 3 other people. We were doing some science experiment, and I got to know everybody in the group a little better. Ronnie came across to me as a little strange. He would say things that were just plain weird or inappropriate. And I know a lot of high school kids are weird and inappropriate, but he kind of crossed the line a bit. He normally would sit right behind me in class, and after the group project, he would occasionally talk to me. For the most part, he was nice to me, and I was nice to him, but he would still say some strange things that I really didn't know how to respond to. I also noticed that he skipped class quite a bit. For the rest of the semester, though, everything was fine. I remember that towards the beginning of second semester, Ronnie followed me on Instagram and added me on Facebook. I no longer had any classes with him. Not long after adding me on social media, he started sending me messages. They started out fairly normal, but when he asked me to hang out and I told him that I was busy, he called me a liar. Now, I didn't really want to hang out with him, but the first time he asked, I legitimately was busy on the day that he asked. Did I use that as an excuse? Yes, I didn't want to hang out with him. I guess he had a feeling that I would say no because he got pretty angry. When he did, I didn't respond to him. I figured that things would be left at that, but a few days later, he started messaging me again. He sent me another message, and I didn't respond. Then he started basically spamming me with more and more messages. When this happened, I had to block him. I blocked him across all social media platforms, and it seemed to work. I didn't hear from him, and within about a week, I had forgotten all about it. Then, one day, we had just gotten out of school for the day and I was leaving. At the time, I drove to school in my car every day and parked in the students' parking lot, which was out the west exit. My car was a little bit older Jeep SUV, maybe 10 years old at the time, and the inside was a little bit messy. I walked out to my car like any other day and got inside. As soon as I sat down to start the engine, I saw something move in the back seat. It was Ronnie sitting up. He had been hiding inside my car, underneath a little pile of clothes I had in the back. When I noticed him, I screamed. He told me to shut up, and then started going on a rant about how bad of a person I was. I was really surprised by this situation. When I was able to realize exactly what was going on, I opened my door and ran away. I ran all the way back inside of the school. Then I found the first school employee that I could, which happened to be a teacher, and I told him about Ronnie being in my car. By the time we got back to my car, though, Ronnie was gone. In the end, he ended up getting expelled for the incident. I will spare you the details of him denying it and saying I made the whole thing up. It was frustrating, but luckily there were witnesses who backed up enough of the story for me. All I wanted was for him to leave me alone, which luckily he did. It's been over 5 years now, and I haven't seen or heard from him since then.
This is something that happened during my freshman year of college. It was a few years ago now, but I still remember it like it was yesterday. At the time, I went to a university with about 10,000 students. For my first year, I lived in an all-female dorm building on the 3rd floor. There were 4 floors total, and I had my own dorm room all to myself. On probably the 3rd or 4th week of school, I went to bed one night just like any other. It was a weeknight, but I don't remember exactly what day. I woke up though at around 3 o'clock in the morning and really had to use the bathroom. The bathrooms were just a ways down the hallway, so I got out of bed and headed to the door. When I got out into the hallway, it was empty and things were very quiet. I had to walk maybe between 50 and 100 feet to get to the bathrooms. Once I was there, the bathrooms that we had was basically a room with 5 doors and a sink. Each door was its own little private bathroom. Nobody was inside, and all of the doors were open when I got there. Not surprising for it being 3 o'clock in the morning. As I was inside one of the rooms, I heard footsteps come from the hallway. Whoever it was then entered the bathrooms and went into one of the rooms across from me. I didn't think too much of it. I was inside for maybe a minute and then left. When I did, the other person was still inside the one across from me. Basically, right when I got back into the hallway, I heard the other bathroom door open. Then, when I was maybe 30 feet away from the bathrooms walking to my room, I heard them start walking in the hallway behind me. I still didn't think much of it at the time, and I expected it to be another girl. But something about it just seemed odd. I don't really know why. I looked over my shoulder to see who it was, but when I did, I saw that it was a man. And it wasn't a college-aged man either. This guy looked much older than me. I was really confused by this. I turned back and kept walking from my room. But instantly, I heard the man speed up his steps. He was walking pretty fast and starting to gain on me. I got a really bad feeling and I sped up as well. By now, I was pretty close to my door and I hadn't locked it with me only going to the bathroom. That was good, meaning I could get inside faster. I could hear the man still getting closer and closer to me, and I started to feel panic setting into my mind. Now, I was only about 10 feet away, and the guy was less than 20 feet behind me. When I got to the door, I quickly opened it, got inside, and then shut the door and locked it behind me. Probably a second later, the guy stopped right outside my door. He then tried opening the door, and my heart started racing even faster than it already was. Then he knocked on it. I had no clue who this guy was or what he wanted. I knew that he wasn't supposed to be here, though. I chose not to answer the door.
I also didn't bother to ask him what he was doing or who he was. There was about 30 seconds of silence after he knocked. I was hoping that he would have gone away, but then he knocked on the door again. It wasn't a very loud knock at all, and after he knocked, I walked over to the door and looked through the peephole. He was sort of short and wearing a black jacket and had sort of blonde hair. I didn't know who he was. He definitely didn't work at the school or anything either. He knocked again for a third time. I really wanted him to just go away. There was no way that I was going to be able to get any sleep with this guy here. He didn't say anything the entire time, but was just standing there. I went away from the door and sat on my bed. I waited, and the guy didn't knock for a really long time. But when I went back over to the door and looked out, thinking maybe he was gone, the guy was still there. I didn't know what to do. I walked back over to my bed. Then the guy knocked one more time. It was really quiet, and I just barely heard it because of how quiet it was. I didn't get up to look. I stayed where I was, and probably 10 more minutes went by. I didn't hear any noises and got up to look again. That's when I saw that the guy was finally gone. After that, I was finally able to get back to sleep. The next morning, I found my resident advisor and told her about the man. She said that she was going to report it. Luckily, I never saw the guy again after that. A few days later, though, I found out that the man had been let into the building much earlier that night. He had told a student that his daughter lived there and he had to give her something. The student let him in, believing his story. It turned out that it was a complete lie, and he must have hid somewhere for hours. I get really creeped out thinking about it. Campus security was informed of the situation, but I never heard anything more of him.
I'm currently a sophomore in college. This past year, I was living in the dorms and I had a room all to myself. The dorm building that I lived in is pretty old, but it's nice, and I lived on the 3rd floor. I really liked my room because it's the farthest room to the end of the hallway. Over the course of the semester, I got to know a good number of people that lived on my floor, and I ended up making some pretty good friends. But one night, after I got ready for bed, I turned off all my lights and tried to fall asleep. I was just starting to feel nice and relaxed when I started to hear a noise in the hallway off in the distance. Generally, our dorm building was pretty quiet, and I was trying to sleep, so it was slightly annoying. It sounded like someone's phone was doing text-to-speech in the hallway, and I could hear it getting closer towards my room. But as it got closer and closer, I could hear that the voice on the phone was not speaking English. I'm not sure what language it was, but I know it wasn't Spanish either, and I couldn't recognize what it was exactly. To be honest, it didn't really sound like a language at all. I heard it keep getting louder and louder until I could tell that it was right outside my door. This was kind of suspicious because I was the farthest room to the end of the hallway, and I knew it wasn't the guy who lived next to me, so I didn't know why somebody would be outside my door. I listened to try to hear what was going on, but I didn't know what it was. Then I remembered that I hadn't locked my doors. I know it's a bad habit, but I just rarely lock my door unless I'm leaving my dorm room for a long period of time. I started to panic, and then I thought I was going to have a heart attack when I heard the door slowly start to open, and I saw lights start to fill my room, which had been pitch black. I saw someone in the doorway, but they were mostly blocked from my view, with me being in my bed and the door being in the way. I just saw their arm sticking out beyond the door, pointed towards me, holding a phone, which is where the sound was coming from. It was still playing a robotic voice, speaking something that I couldn't understand at all. This continued for several seconds, until they took another step in my room, which revealed them to be what looked like a guy wearing a ski mask. They pointed their phone at me, and I asked what they wanted. They then slowly backed away and left the room. I quickly got up and shut my door and locked it. I had a really hard time falling asleep after that. I tried to tell myself that it was just a college kid pulling a prank, or maybe someone who was drunk, but I just had a strong feeling that it wasn't. I did my best to just forget about it, and eventually I fell asleep. The next day I got an email from the resident assistant at my dorm. It was sent to everyone on my floor with the subject, "Floor Incident." The email went on to say how a suspicious person was seen in the dorm who didn't live there and asked if we knew anything about it to contact them. I told them my story, but I never heard anything beyond that.
When I was in high school, I used to ride the bus to and from school during my freshman and sophomore years. This happened during my sophomore year. I lived sort of at the end of a curving and quiet street. Most people who lived in my neighborhood had long driveways and large properties with lots of trees. The city that I lived in was pretty spread out and rural. The bus did not come down my street, so I had to walk down it and wait at the end. I was also the only person on my street to ride the bus. Generally, the bus would get there really early in the morning. I don't recall the exact time, but it would usually be dark out still when it picked me up. When I got dropped off after school, I would also have to walk the distance of my street. It was not so bad at all though, and the most annoying part was that it was kind of unpredictable when the bus would get there in the morning. It would often be late, I remember, so I would be standing out waiting for a while sometimes. Other times, it would get there right after I got to the corner. The location that I got picked up from was a busier road that mine connected to. It was usually pretty quiet though when I got picked up. One morning, I left my house and was walking down the street to wait for the bus. When I passed by one of the curves in the road, I saw what appeared to be a man just inside one of my neighbor's yards. I knew that he didn't live there, and he was behind one of the trees, and I could barely see him. It appeared as though he was hiding, which I thought was really odd. I only looked at him for like a second, and then I just kept walking. I made it to the end of the street eventually, and the bus got there a very short time later. I was at school after that until I rode the bus home that afternoon. When I got dropped off at the corner, I started walking back to my house. I had forgotten all about the man that I had seen earlier, but when I was passing by almost the same area, I saw him again. It was really strange. He was hanging out in the woods just off the road. In that area, it was pretty dense and would be easy to hide in there. I wasn't sure what the guy was doing, but it looked very suspicious. I guess he could have been visiting one of the neighbors or something, but I was pretty sure that he didn't live here at all. I walked past, trying to ignore him. He was somewhat visible, but also sort of blocked by tree branches. After making it past, I continued to walk and was a little more than halfway down the street to my house. I remember that when I made it farther, I looked back and noticed the man was now standing in the street. He was slowly starting to walk behind me. I hadn't known that he had even left the woods. It was really creepy to see. I was a long ways up from him though, so I wasn't too worried just yet. I kept walking, and when I made it to my driveway, looked again to see him still walking. He was about the same distance back though. The guy was just wearing jeans and a gray sweatshirt, and I never got that good of a look at his face. He appeared to have dark hair though. I quickly walked up my driveway, got out my keys, and went inside. When I was in, I felt a lot better and checked out the front window. The view of the street from there was partly obstructed by trees that we had in our yard. Still, I didn't see him at all. I was home alone for a while until my parents got home from work. During this time though, I didn't see the man at all. I ended up sort of forgetting about him as the day went on. The next morning, I left my house again to catch the bus. I walked on our street, and in another woods area, saw somebody walking through when I passed by. I immediately remembered the man and realized that it was him. I walked faster and passed by the area where he was. When I did, I didn't look over at all, but tried to ignore him. I assumed that it would be a similar situation to the previous day. But this time, when I made it to the straight part of the road that led to my bus stop, I heard footsteps behind me. It was very quiet with it being so early, and I could hear him walking. I looked behind me and saw the guy maybe 100 feet back. He was walking in the middle of the street now. I walked faster and soon made it to where I would wait for the bus. I looked down the street but didn't see my bus coming. I really hoped that it would arrive before the man reached me, but today it seemed to be running late. As I impatiently waited, I looked over my shoulder. The man was still walking towards me, and now about 50 feet back. I couldn't wait any longer, and I went to the left. I walked along the side of the busy road, which had no sidewalk and really no place to walk at all. There was just a slim margin outside the road line. I walked along this road towards the other street a ways down that I knew my bus went down before my road. It was a ways away, but I didn't know where else to go or what else to do. When I did this, I noticed the man start to follow me there as well. I walked faster and hoped that the guy wouldn't start running after me or something. For a couple more minutes, he seemed to maintain my speed and was like 50 feet back still. I walked along this road until I actually saw my bus up ahead. It was leaving the street that it went down before mine, and then turning onto the busier road that I was walking on. It was a great sight to see. I kept walking and then stopped and started waving for the bus. The bus stopped for me and I got on. When I did, I looked to see where the man was. He was in the ditch and disappeared into the woods, which was about 30 or 40 feet off the road. My bus driver looked confused, but I told him what happened. The man was gone now, but my driver agreed to drop me off in front of my house after school instead of at the corner. So after school, I was dropped off right in front of my driveway. As we drove down my street, I didn't notice the guy anyplace, but he could have easily been hiding in the woods again. I was able to make it inside safely. When my parents got home, I told them about it. They called the police, and I remember that the neighborhood was searched, but unfortunately, the man was gone by that point. None of the neighbors knew who he was either. After that, my bus would pick me up in front of my driveway and drop me off in front of it as well. Luckily, I never saw the guy again after that. I went to a fairly small university for college and was there for 4 years. During my 3rd year there, I had one scary experience. It was a normal school day, and I drove from my small apartment to campus. I only lived like a mile away, and the campus was nice, but a little small. There were several different buildings that classes were in, and after parking in a parking lot, I walked to the building where mine was. When I got inside, I went to the classroom. Now, this was not a big lecture hall, but more similar to almost a high school classroom. There were about 30 students in the class, and then the professor. I remember that class started as usual. The professor was giving a lecture, and we were all sitting there and taking notes. About 15 minutes in, maybe, I heard a voice come over the speakers in the classroom. There was an announcement that the entire campus was going into a lockdown, and this was not a drill. They did not say the reason why, but said for students to remain in the buildings that they were currently in. Our professor looked and saw that she had received a text about the situation and started following the procedures. However, she was not told the reason for the lockdown at that time. It was similar to a high school lockdown drill. That was my only experience with lockdowns to that point. I had never been involved in a real one before. I was a little bit nervous, but felt safe in the classroom that we were in. The professor turned out all of the lights, locked the doors, and closed the blinds to the one window that the room had. She then told us to remain in our seats and stay calm. We were all wondering what the lockdown was for, and everybody started going on their phones to look it up. However, nobody could find any information other than that we were in a lockdown. Our college was not tiny, but a little bit smaller, so a lockdown would not necessarily make news coverage. We sat there in our desks, just waiting and wondering for a while. Mostly, we just went on our phones and did whatever. Occasionally, there were small conversations, but things were mostly pretty quiet. After almost an hour, the lockdown was lifted. The professor was informed and we were let out of class. After that, it was announced that classes had been canceled for the rest of the day. It was nice to have class canceled, but I was still concerned. We were told that they did not believe we were in any immediate danger, but I still wanted to know the reason why. I ended up just going home and back to my apartment. I talked with several friends over text, and there was a rumor that one of the professors was attacked or something. I didn't know if it was just a rumor or speculation, but we were never given an official reason for the lockdown. Later that night, we all got an email that classes for the next day were canceled as well. I was able to stay home and get ahead of things with homework and stuff. Finally, the next day after that, classes and everything resumed as normal. I went to my first class of the day, and it went by just fine. Afterwards, I walked across campus to another building for my next class. I was a little bit early and stopped to use the restroom down the hallway. Just seconds after I entered the bathroom, I was literally in a stall when I heard that the school was going into a lockdown again. I couldn't believe it. At first, I was very confused. How could we be having another lockdown again? I didn't even know for sure why we had the first one. As I was still in there, in one of the women's restroom stalls, I heard the door to the bathrooms open. Whoever walked in there started immediately talking under their breath. I couldn't really make out what they were saying, but I could tell that it was a man, which was really weird. This was the women's restroom. I lifted up my feet so the guy wouldn't see me, whoever he was. It sounded like he was walking around towards the front of the bathroom near the door and just talking to himself. After a few seconds of that, he kind of stopped and then seemed to stand by the door for a while. Then the door opened again and the guy left. I felt relieved and then checked my phone to see if there was any information on the lockdown. I couldn't find anything, so I walked out to leave the bathroom. I didn't really know what was going on out there, but I didn't want to stay in the bathroom anymore, especially after a guy had walked in it. As soon as I left though, I saw several police officers in the hallway. They seemed to be walking down the hall to the left, past where I was. When they saw me, they said that I should go back into the bathroom, so I did. I waited just inside and didn't know what on earth was happening. I stayed in the bathroom for almost 20 minutes until it was okay to come out, and then the lockdown ended. Once again, classes were canceled for the rest of the day. I found out all of the details afterwards. A man had in fact attempted to attack one of the professors the day of the first lockdown. He fled the building and was actually able to get away. A few days later, he came back and went after the professor again. This time, he was seen by a campus security guard, and he ran away again immediately. He was later found in a hallway, not far from the bathroom that I was in. I'm pretty sure he was the person who had been in the bathroom with me. It creeps me out to think about it.
In fall of 2019, I was a freshman in college. I went to a smaller school and I lived in the dorms. I had a roommate named Danny who was a real jerk. But that's not the horror story. Sure, it was annoying to be in that small dorm room with Danny. He would talk a lot and pester me on purpose a lot of times. Because of this, I tried to spend as much time away from our dorm room as possible. I would do all my studying in different places around campus. Spots to sit and get work done were everywhere, in just about every building. Even if I wasn't doing homework, I could sit and watch YouTube videos or whatever. I preferred it to being in my dorm room if Danny was there. I got into a routine of this after probably the first month. So one night, I remember that I was doing homework in this one building. It was the building that a lot of our classrooms were in and had several different subjects. There were about 4 floors to it, and I was up on the 3rd or 4th floor, but I don't remember which one. I was in a comfortable chair that had a table attached to it. It was built for studying and stuff. There were a few of these types of chairs that looked out a window that had a nice view of campus. I took a break at about 6 p.m. and went to the dining hall to eat. I met up with a friend there and then afterwards went back to the same building at the same spot that I was at before to finish my homework. The buildings didn't close if you were a student, and you could stay there as long as you wanted. By now, especially up on one of the top floors, things were very quiet and nobody else was really around. I kept working and was there until probably like 9 p.m. As I worked, I had my headphones in and played some music in the background. Sometimes I would do that and sometimes I wouldn't. It just depended on what I was doing and how I felt. So right after I was done and I took my headphones out, I heard footsteps behind me immediately. The walkway went behind me, and one direction led to some classrooms and the other led to some stairs. The footsteps were coming from the hallway with some classrooms in it. I started picking up my laptop and putting things into my backpack. As I did, the footsteps got closer and closer. It didn't seem like the person was going to walk by me though. It almost seemed like they were going to approach me instead. I turned around to look and see who it was. All I saw though was somebody ducking around a corner behind a beam. I didn't get a look at the person, but just saw part of them for like a second. This was kind of weird. I finished putting my things in my backpack and then stood up, looking to where I saw the person again. I still saw nothing. Then I walked over to the stairs and left the building. I went back to my dorm after that. But the very next day, there was a similar experience. This time, after studying in a different building, I went to the performing arts building to study that night. This building was almost always pretty quiet. There were much less classrooms inside of it, and unless there was a concert or something going on, not many people would be there. I studied in peace for basically the whole time, and saw only about 2 or 3 people walking by in the entire time that I was in there.
For the last 2 hours probably, I saw nobody at all. The location that I was studying in was on the first floor and next to a staircase where there was a table and chair set up for studying. It was kind of out of the way, but there was a hallway going past and another one that connected. I did not have my headphones in this time and could hear everything around me. Things were very quiet, and it soon got to be kind of late. At one point, though, I heard footsteps coming from down the hallway. Just when these footsteps were about to get into my view, though, they stopped. It was like just around the corner where I couldn't see. There was no room that I was aware of right there either. It was like the person had just stopped in their tracks. If they went back the other way or moved at all, I would have heard them. What were they doing? Were they just standing there? I had no idea. I decided to pack up my stuff and head back to my dorm. When I did, I didn't hear anything. Luckily for me, I did not have to walk past that hallway, and I would be going the other way. When I left, as soon as I started heading down the hallway, I heard the footsteps again. This time, they followed me, but were still out of my sight. Then I heard them start to get closer and within my view. I turned around to see who it was that was there. I did it very quickly to not be weird, so I didn't get a good look at the person, but I did see them. There was a tall and thin-looking guy, walking a little ways back, behind me. It seemed as though he was walking pretty fast. This was way too weird, and as I walked, I passed by an exit door. It wasn't one of the main entrances or exits to the building, but at the last moment, I turned and I left. Once I was out of there, I headed back for the main area of campus. The guy didn't leave the building, whoever it was. I wondered if this was the same person who had been there the previous night. I went back to my dorm room, and after that, decided to take a break from studying around campus at night. As much as I didn't like to study in my dorm room with Danny, it wasn't the worst thing in the world. But the story doesn't quite end there. A few days later, I had classes like normal and was gone for most of the day. I returned to our dorm in the late afternoon, and Danny was there. When I got into the room, he told me that someone had come by and asked for me. Apparently, somebody knocked on our door, and when Danny answered, a guy asked if I was there. I asked Danny what the guy looked like, and he said tall and thin, and basically described the same guy that I had seen the other night. I asked if the guy said what he wanted with me. He didn't say, though. Apparently, he just walked away. After that, I never saw the man again. I'm currently a high school gym teacher. This is something that happened just last school year. One day, I was preparing for a class that I was about to teach. In the class, we were going to be using the high school gymnasium and doing some activities. For this, I needed to get some equipment such as the orange cones and whatnot. But the school is kind of old, and the storage room for the equipment for some reason is not really that close to the gym. Instead, I have to walk down this really long hallway that's nearby, and there are a few storage rooms towards the end of it. So on this day, I left the gym and walked down this long hallway to the storage room. When I opened up the door, it was mostly dark inside of it. Now, these storage rooms are very cluttered. Things are not organized the best, and there are several shelves and other things in there, so it's kind of big. After getting inside, it was very dark. I didn't even bother to turn the light on though, because I knew exactly what I needed and where it was. However, after taking a couple of steps inside, suddenly I heard a noise. The next thing I knew, one of the equipment shelves was falling over, right on top of me. After landing on me, basically everything fell off the shelf. I was fine, but I was knocked down and covered in random stuff. It all happened so fast, but I knew that somebody was in here and had pushed over that shelf. It was not something that would just fall over on its own. I pushed the junk off of me and looked around. I heard somebody moving away, but didn't see who was in there. I got up to my feet and was about to go back out of the room into the hallway, but when I did, I heard another voice and turned and just barely saw what looked like a man. He moved out of view really quickly, and then he started to push over another shelf. I was able to get out of the room just before the other shelf came crashing down. When I left, I heard the guy going to leave as well. As I was walking away, I saw the door open and just barely saw this guy coming out of the room. I knew that he didn't work at the school. This was also no student. I then sprinted down the hall and ran back into the gym. When I got there, I took out my phone and reported the incident.
The police were called, and the school was put into a lockdown. For the lockdown, I went to an otherwise vacant classroom that was really close to the gym. This classroom did not belong to any teacher in particular, and was used for gym classes as well as sports teams. So when I went inside there, I was all by myself, and I locked the door. As I was inside, maybe 5 minutes later, there was a banging on the door. I had a bad feeling about it. I walked over and removed the window cover to look and see who was there. I saw the same man. As soon as he saw me, he tried opening the locked door. Then he started banging on it again. It was like he was trying to break the door with how hard he was pounding on it. But luckily, the school's doors were very strong. I just went back over to my desk and reported where the guy was. I hoped that he would leave me alone, but I also wanted him to get caught. He continued to bang on the door for a good 2 or 3 minutes. Then the police arrived. They were able to get the man and leave the school with him. I'm not sure how he got in. He had been hiding in that storage room for a while though, possibly as long as a day. I still can't believe that he pushed the shelf over onto me, and I'm glad that I'm okay. Every time I go to those storage rooms though, I still get worried that somebody will be hiding in there.
I'm a college student, and I don't own a car. Because of this, I walk everywhere around campus. I don't mind this though, because it's good exercise, and the weather is pretty nice all year round in this part of the country. Last year, I worked at one of the buildings for my college job on campus. And one night after a shift, I was walking home from work at about 11 o'clock at night. It was about a 20-minute walk to my apartment, which was a short ways off campus. Once I got off the school campus, things got a lot quieter and darker, which was slightly creepy, but I had done the walk 100 times, so I didn't care. That is until I noticed what sounded like footsteps behind me. I looked over my shoulder, but I didn't see anyone at all. For whatever reason, I was just a little scared. I walk literally everywhere and have walked many times at night, so I don't know why this particular time it freaked me out a little bit, but it just did. I continued my walk, and several other times I thought I heard footsteps behind me, but every time I looked, I never saw anyone. It was very dark out, however, so I didn't have a good view behind me, but nevertheless, I just kept walking. Finally, I made it to my place, which was an apartment, but had access to my door from the outside. I went to my door, unlocked it, and went inside. Then I locked my door and started walking to the bathroom to take a shower before bed. Just as I was walking into the bathroom, I heard the doorknob to my front door turn. I immediately got a terrible feeling. I lived alone and I wasn't expecting anybody, and it came to my mind how I felt like I was being followed all the way home. I didn't hear anything for a few seconds, so I slowly made my way over to the door and peeked out the window. I saw what appeared to be a man walking away, but he was pretty far off by that time. After about 20 minutes, I convinced myself he was gone, and I got ready for bed. I locked my bedroom door and went to sleep. The next morning, I woke up, and everything seemed normal until I opened my bedroom door to see that everything in the rest of my apartment was messed up. I immediately got back in my room and locked the door, then I called the police. I felt like an idiot for not calling them the night before. I stayed in my bedroom until they came, but whoever broke into my house was long gone. Somehow they were able to pry my front door open, and I didn't even notice in the night. I'm a really deep sleeper, but I'm still surprised I didn't wake up from it. In the end, I had a few things stolen, but I'm glad I was okay.
I went to a pretty big college. It was several hours from the city where I'm from, and a few of my high school classmates also went there. This is something that happened during my junior year. I lived in a house with 3 of my friends, 2 of which went to high school with me as well. It was a 2-story house that we lived in and somewhat small, but enough space for all of us. When the school year started, I had a lot of students in most of my classes because of how big our school was. One class in particular had about 200 kids in it.
I would go to the lectures each time, on Mondays and Wednesdays when they were held, and I would usually sit in the same spot. It was a large room with many seats in it. Over time, I would see a lot of the same faces in class, but I didn't really have any good friends in this particular class. One of the people who would always seem to sit around me was this one guy. He would usually sit a few rows behind me, and he was sort of tall and had dark brown hair. I never really paid much attention to him, but I just recognized him. But I began noticing him more when he started to seemingly be following me home. It started one day after class, when I walked out of the building and just happened to notice him walking behind me. I would drive to class and back because I lived off campus, so I would go to a parking lot, get in my car, and then leave. He happened to park near me, so he did the same. As far as I knew, this was just a coincidence. I would never pay attention to who was driving behind me. But there was this one time that I didn't go straight home, but went to the school cafeteria instead. I noticed this guy walked behind me the whole time, and he also went to the cafeteria. I still didn't think much of it and thought it was maybe a coincidence. After I got inside and got food, I'm not really sure which way he went because I was just minding my own business. But the very next day of class that we had, I left to go straight home and went to my car. For whatever reason, I noticed the guy again as he went to his car, which was parked a little ways from mine. But this time, I noticed him driving behind me all the way until I got to my place. When I parked on the side of the street in front of our house, he kept driving past me. One of the next times that we had class, he followed me in his car again, but I wasn't driving back to my place this time. This time, I went to a gas station to get gas, and he just happened to do the same thing. Something about this seemed really weird. Was it a coincidence, or was he always following me? I decided to ask around the class the next time that we had it. There were a few people who I usually sat by. They weren't necessarily friends, but I would occasionally talk to them about things from the class. I pointed out the guy to them and asked if they knew anything about him. None of them did, though. I brought the guy up to my roommates as well, but they didn't seem to have any idea who the guy was. It was a mystery to me. But then, the guy just stopped showing up to class. I remember he wasn't there for like 4 or 5 times in a row. I wondered why, but I was actually glad that he wasn't in class anymore, because he was seeming to be following me. Then, one night, I was returning home from my on-campus part-time job that I had. It was dark out, and when I got to my street, I saw a man walking down the sidewalk in front of our house. As I got closer, I noticed it was the same guy. I did not want to park my car in the street close to him, or have to see him at all, so I kept driving and passed by our house. I couldn't believe that I saw him. I was telling myself that he must have lived close to me in this general neighborhood. After I left our street, I drove around the block to get back to our street again. It took me maybe a minute or so, and I was expecting the guy to be gone when I got back. But when I pulled around again, he was still there. He was just kind of standing around, or pacing almost. The area that he was in was right by where I parked my car every day. I had a really bad feeling, and I didn't want to take any chances, so I kept driving and decided not to go home. Instead, I headed back towards campus and called one of my roommates. I told her about the guy in front of our house, and she went to check out the front window and told me that she saw him. She did not know who he was, and told me she would let me know if he went away. I got a call about 20 minutes later that he had finally left the area. Then, once more, I drove back home. After getting back, I looked around the street and was quick to get inside the house. I didn't see the guy at all. Not too long after that, I went upstairs to go to bed. I fell asleep pretty quickly, but one of my roommates soon woke me up. She told me that the guy was back and that she had already called the police. I was really confused at first and didn't know what was going on, but she led me into her bedroom, which had a window that looked out to the back of our house. In the backyard, we looked down and saw the guy was standing at the back door, seemingly trying to open it. She said he had been there for a while. It was almost 1 o'clock in the morning at that time. We waited upstairs and hoped that the guy wouldn't get in, and luckily, he didn't. When we heard the sound of a car driving down the street, it stopped by our house, and then we saw the man try to run away. However, he ended up being stopped by the police not too far from our house. I remember I heard that he claimed he was trying to get to his friend's house, and he mixed up the address. We all knew that was a lie. It turned out the guy didn't even go to our school and was never enrolled there. All those times he was in class with me, who knows what his real intentions were.
Back Back in 2018, a series of events happened to me that still haunt me to this day. I was 19 years old at the time and a sophomore in college at a big university. I had just moved into an off-campus apartment, and unfortunately as a female, I was living on the first floor. From the day I moved in, I can't explain it, but I felt a bad energy. My room was at the end of the apartment, right next to our patio/sliding glass door. Over the month before this incident occurred, I always felt like I was being watched. I can't explain it, but anytime I left to go to my car or the gym at the complex, I always moved fast and looked over my shoulder. Anyways, one night we had all gone to bed. I had work the next morning and was trying to fall asleep before it was too late. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of my doorknob turning. Fortunately, I locked my bedroom door every night. It became a habit after I had this terrible lucid dream about a man standing in my dorm a few months prior. I sat up and looked at my door. After a few minutes of silence, I thought maybe I was just hearing things. I laid back down, but a few minutes later, heard it again. This time, I knew for sure what it was. I sat straight up in bed and looked at the base of the door. I saw shadows of feet. Someone was 100% standing there. Then I heard 3 faint knocks. Without even pausing to think, I yelled out, "Who's there?" I figured at first that it had to be one of my roommates messing with me, but no one answered, and it was silent again. I called one of my 2 roommates, the one I figured would possibly do something like this, and she answered after 3 rings and was super groggy. I had just woken her up. I told her to lock her door, because I was pretty sure someone was in the apartment. We woke up our other roommate by banging on the walls because her phone was off for the night, and we didn't feel safe going out of our bedrooms if someone was still inside. She was so confused by the noise, she came running out of her room, thinking it was morning time and someone had been locked out. I heard her come out, and finally then opened my door and came out. We checked the entire apartment, but no one was there. It was then that we reached the sliding glass door, which we realized was unlocked, and the curtains had been pushed aside. The realization that someone had been at my bedroom door for at least 10 to 15 minutes hit me like a ton of bricks. We called the police and filed a report, but nothing came of it. I was so creeped out I couldn't sleep in that room again. To keep a long story short, every time I tried to go back to that apartment, weird things happened. We ended up calling the police a second time when we heard someone outside of my roommate's window at 2 o'clock in the morning. We had all decided to sleep in her room that night since I couldn't be in my room, and when we all woke up to the sound, we called right away. They didn't find anyone, but did see footprints around the window. The weird thing was when I wasn't at the apartment, nothing ever happened. It was only when I was there that odd things occurred, as if someone had been watching me the entire time, only trying to get me. After all, they hadn't stolen anything, and they didn't try opening any of my roommates' doors, as they were both unlocked, meaning they would have got in no problem. Now, the weirdest part of the story, my boyfriend at the time, he's now my husband, lived in a different city and would come and visit me on the weekends. Right after the break-in, he was driving his car when he noticed a problem with his tire. He took it to the shop, and they told him in all their years of experience they had never seen anything like this. Someone had taken 4 of the 5 lug nuts off 2 of his tires. The fact that the wheels hadn't popped off while he was driving and possibly killed him was crazy. It was such a vicious and intentional thing to do. I have no idea if this was done by the same person who broke into my apartment, but the timing of the events is definitely suspicious.
I graduated from college a couple of years ago. I'm a female, and I went to a relatively smaller college to get my undergraduate degree. When I was at that school, my first year, I lived on campus in a dorm building. I was able to walk to all of my classes and back because of this. The floor of my dorm that I lived on was an all-female floor, which was the 3rd floor. I remember that after one of my first days of class, I was in bed by probably 11 p.m. I had the whole dorm room to myself and fell asleep pretty quickly. I woke up sometime in the night, though, to a knock on my door. I was so tired, and I could see it was still dark out. After rubbing my eyes, I looked at the clock to see that it was 3 a.m. There was once again another set of knocks on my door. I couldn't imagine why anybody would be knocking on my door at this hour, and I did not want to answer it. Eventually, it stopped. But then I heard another noise. It sounded like a man laughing. I could just barely hear it, but that's what it seemed to be. And not a younger man, but a sort of older sounding man. Finally, it sounded like whoever was there walked away, because I heard footsteps moving in the other direction and no longer heard the laughing. I wasn't sleepy anymore, and I decided to get out of bed and look out my peephole. When I did, I didn't see anybody there, so I opened the door quietly and looked down the hallway. At the very end, I saw what appeared to be a man walking at the end of the hallway towards the stairs. He looked much older than college age. I quickly shut my door and closed it again as soon as I saw him. After that, I made sure my door was locked and went back to bed. The next day was another normal day of classes for me. I happened to have a night class on that particular day, which I wasn't too thrilled about, but it was a class that I needed, and it was only available at night. The class went from 7 to 8:30 p.m., and I walked there that night. There was only about 15 other kids or so in the class, and I sat at a desk in the back of the room and got out my laptop to take notes. I happened to be the only person in the back 2 rows of desks in that classroom. As I was taking notes on my laptop and listening to the professor, I happened to look over to the back door of the classroom. The door was just a little bit behind where I was sitting, and as I looked over to it, I noticed there was someone looking in. I saw the face of an older guy looking directly at me with a really creepy-looking smile. He kept looking at me for a good 5 seconds or so, before suddenly ducking down. After that, I looked back over to the window of the door several more times, but thankfully he didn't come back. When class ended, I packed up my laptop and began walking back to my dorm. It was maybe a 10-minute walk across the campus. By now, it was dark out, and the campus was pretty quiet. As I walked back on the sidewalk, it didn't take long before I heard footsteps behind me, but I didn't feel the need to look back until they started getting closer and closer. I knew I wasn't walking that slow, so I turned back. When I did, I saw the same guy who I had seen when I was in class. The guy was looking at me, and when I saw him, he began to smile again and then started to laugh. I recognized his laugh. This had to be the same guy who was knocking on my door in the middle of the night. I started walking faster, but the man began to run. I then started running to try to get away from him. I ran off from the sidewalk and into the road. The man followed. This road was quiet at this time of night, but in the distance, I could see a campus safety vehicle. It was parked on the side of the road, and I ran directly towards it, and as I got closer, it noticed me. This is when the man seemed to notice too, and he stopped chasing me, and instead he started running in another direction. When I reached the campus safety car, I told the officer what was going on. The man had pretty much gotten away by then, but the officer radioed to the police as well as the other campus safety officers. I went back to my dorm after that. I was pretty scared for a few days, but luckily never saw the guy again.
Back when I was in high school, I remember that my friends and I found this secret room inside of the school. The room wasn't actually hidden or anything, but it was a classroom that was no longer used. Now it was vacant and just stored a bunch of random stuff in it. You see, the school that I went to was pretty old, but it had been renovated several times. This caused the overall layout to be somewhat strange, and this classroom was in the corner of a normally quiet hallway. It was not in an area that would normally get a lot of foot traffic. My friend Michael was the one that originally found it. I'm not sure how, but I guess he must have just been curious and tried opening the door. Apparently the lock on the door didn't work, so it would just open. So Michael, me, and 2 other friends are the ones who knew about it. We had a bit of a friend group, and we went in, and it was interesting to see all the stuff in there. It had some things from over 10 years ago, such as old assignments from various teachers and old equipment. There were box TVs that were on those stands with wheels, and old whiteboards as well. The room also had desks scattered about, and tons of books. It was quite cluttered, and had carpeted floors as well. So my friends and I would occasionally go into the room and hang out before school, between classes, during lunch, or other random times. It was just our secret hangout spot for the friend group. We were certain that nobody knew we were in there, and we made sure that nobody was looking whenever we went in, which was pretty easy. So one day, in between classes, I went there with 3 other friends. It was right before our last class of the day. Michael had told us to meet there in our friend group chat. He wanted to talk about some plans to hang out and play basketball over the weekend. So I remember that everybody left to go to their classes, except for me and Michael, because we had a class together and it was really close by. We were still sitting at desks and talking when we heard this sound come over the school intercom. It was strange because I didn't know what it was about, but shortly after, we heard this announcement that the school was being locked down. In my time in high school to that point, we had never had a lockdown before. I didn't really know what the reason for it was, but I was a little bit nervous. Obviously, in a lockdown, you're supposed to go to the nearest classroom and nobody's allowed to be in the hallways. Michael and I thought about walking to our classroom, but then decided to just stay in the room that we were in. I mean, we were in a classroom after all, and nobody probably even knew that we were here. There had been lockdown drills at the school before, so we knew the basics of what you're supposed to do. Turn the lights out in the classroom and lock the door. There was a cover already over the small window in the door to this classroom, so whether the light was on or off, you really couldn't tell from the hallway. So we left it on, and then I went to try to lock the door. However, I remembered that the lock on the door seemed to be broken. I mean, that's how we were able to get in the room in the first place. We figured that that wasn't a big deal though. So Michael and I just sat in random desks in the room, talked and went on our phones, and waited for the lockdown to be over. Neither of us had any idea as to what it was for. Other than us, things were very quiet. We texted some friends trying to figure out what was happening, but nobody seemed to know. Then, I would say about 15 minutes into the lockdown, we heard footsteps approaching in the hallway. I was sitting not too far away from the door, so I quickly got up and turned the light off, just in case it was visible at all from the outside. The footsteps continued to get closer, and Michael and I got really concerned. We probably weren't supposed to be in here in the first place, so whoever this was, if they came into the room, we had to hide. Very quickly, we decided to just find a hiding place. Now, there was so much junk in the room that it really wasn't too hard to find a hiding spot. Michael and I took about 10 seconds to get in our places. He went in the far corner of the room behind a cabinet, and I hid on the ground to the side of the desk. The classroom was also very dark, so it would not be obvious where we were. Then, just moments after hiding, the footsteps reached right outside of the door. The doorknob turned and the door opened. Then we heard somebody entering. I looked up from where I was. I saw this man walk in, but I couldn't really tell what he looked like because of how dark it was. I was confident that he couldn't see me though. When the guy got inside of the room, he closed the door quietly, then stood just inside of the entrance. After a few seconds, he took a few steps into the room. Michael and I were both trying to be as quiet as we possibly could. I literally held my breath for a while before breathing as quietly as possible. The man was just standing around a few feet inside the room for a while. This went on for maybe 5 minutes. I wasn't sure who this guy was, if he worked for the school, or if he was possibly the cause of the lockdown. He didn't really seem like a teacher, and I didn't know why he would enter this room, so I was starting to think that it was the latter. Then, out of nowhere, Michael made a sound. I think that he just moved slightly. I'm not sure why, but you could just barely hear it because of how quiet it was. When this happened, I heard the man in the room suddenly move a little bit. Then he spoke. The guy said, "What was that? Is somebody in here?" My heart started beating like crazy, but I didn't move or make a sound. Michael did the same. After a few moments of silence, the man called out again, asking who was there. He sounded aggravated and even kind of nervous. Then he shouted, asking if anybody was inside of the room. Michael and I did not make a peep. Then we heard the man quickly walk to the doorway, and the door opened up seconds later. Then the man left. I let out a huge sigh of relief, and I'm sure that Michael did the same. We stayed in our hiding places for a while though, just in case the man were to come back. Probably about 20 minutes later, there was an announcement that the lockdown was over. We felt much better. We then left the classroom and went to our final class of the day. Later after school, we were able to find out that the lockdown was caused by a suspicious man inside of the school. Based on what I heard, I'm 100% certain that the man that entered the classroom we were in was the same guy. He must have been trying to find a place to hide, and we were already in there. Apparently, Michael must have scared him off. I'm really glad that the guy didn't try to find us or anything, and just left.
This happened back when I was in college. It was my freshman year, and I lived in the dorms on the second floor. The dorm building that I had was very popular for freshmen and was pretty large. I remember that not long into the school year, maybe a week or two in, I started to get to know some people. I was making some friends in my classes and got to know a couple people who lived on my floor as well. There was this one guy, though, who I always seemed to run into or see. He was a little short, had dark brown hair, and lived down the hall from me. Almost every day when I left for class, I would see him. He would seem to be leaving either right before me or right after me. And when I would return to my dorm, I would almost always see him too. It was crazy. The school was not that large, but it wasn't that small either. I also saw him in several different locations around campus. I chalked it up to just a coincidence. I mean, we likely had similar class schedules, and we were both freshmen. Despite seeing him all the time, I never actually spoke with him. After probably a month of seeing this guy multiple times on just about a daily basis, I didn't think that much of it. But I got suspicious one time when I went to go fill up my water bottle down the hall. The dorm rooms had no running water or bathrooms in them, so you had to go down the hall to use either the community bathrooms or the community water fountain. I left my room, and the water fountain was kind of around the corner. When I walked back and entered my dorm room, I saw the guy just standing there a few feet inside. He looked surprised to see me, but I was just as surprised to see him. He said something like, "Sorry, I accidentally went in the wrong room." Then he quickly walked past me and left. I was so confused that I didn't say anything, and I just watched him leave. Then he was gone, and I locked my door. After thinking about it for a while, though, I realized how that made no sense what he said. Sure, he lived on my floor, but we had been living there for like a month now. There's no way he would just accidentally walk into the wrong room. I had only been gone for like 30 seconds to a minute at most filling up my water, so he had probably just entered my room when I got back. That very same night, though, it got even weirder. I was up late doing homework. It was probably like 11 p.m. or maybe midnight. I was planning to go to bed really soon. I just remember that when I was in my room, I heard my doorknob start to turn. My door was thankfully locked, so whoever it was did not get in. But I knew who it probably was right away. That one guy that I kept seeing. I got up and ran over to the door and looked out of the peephole. When I got there, though, whoever it was now gone, and I saw nothing. Now I was really creeped out that he tried to enter my room so late at night. Of course, I had no proof who it was, but I had a strong feeling. The next day, I saw the guy once more. He left his dorm room not long after I passed by his in the hallway. I was walking to my class, and I assumed that he was doing the same. He was walking about 20 feet behind me, maybe, and I thought about turning around and confronting him. Then I could ask him if he tried to enter my room the previous night, but I decided not to. I just walked to class and didn't see him anymore when I was about halfway there on campus. I didn't see him for the rest of the day either, until later that night. This time, though, I went down to the computer lab. We had a smaller computer lab in the basement of my dorm building. Generally, it was pretty quiet, especially late at night. It was a better place to get homework done, because there was a printer and less distractions than my room. So I was finishing an assignment and focused on that. All of a sudden, I looked up and saw the guy at another computer. He wasn't looking at me, but I was so mad when I saw him. There was no way he was not purposely following me around or something. He wasn't that close to me, but when I saw him, I just finished as fast as possible and then left. I didn't want to be around him anymore. When I left the lab, I did not notice him leaving right after me or anything. I quickly made it back to my room and locked the door. Then I went to bed after that. The next thing that happened was a few days later. It was the weekend, I believe either a Friday night or Saturday night. I went out with some friends and was gone until pretty late. At probably sometime after midnight, I was dropped off in front of my dorm building. I went inside and then was walking up to my room. Things were very quiet with how late it was. When I got up to my floor, I walked down the hallway to the end where my room was. But shortly after I passed by that one guy's door, I heard it open. I sensed him start to walk behind me. I was slightly annoyed, but that was all. As I kept walking to my room, though, he continued to follow me and seemed to be getting closer. I walked a little bit faster, and I could feel him getting closer still. Then I just started running. I ran the rest of the way to my room, unlocked the door as fast as possible, and then got inside. When I was unlocking it,
I could hear him now running, but I didn't look. Then I slammed the door shut and locked it. Not even a second after that, he arrived at my door and tried opening it. He was trying like crazy, but the door was locked, and then he started pushing on the door like he was trying to force it open. I took out my phone and called campus safety. Meanwhile, he started to basically throw himself up against the door, like he was trying to break it down or something. This went on for a minute or so, and then he stopped. I went to the peephole and looked, but he was still standing there. I thought he was going to walk away, but then he tried opening the door again and breaking the door, but the door held up. Then a campus security officer arrived and saw him at my door. He was questioned, and I heard him claiming that he must be at the wrong door again. What a lie. He went back to his room after that, and then I talked with the campus safety. The guy ended up getting kicked out of the dorm building, and I believe kicked out of the university as well. I never saw him after that. I'm sort of worried that he might show up and stalk me someday or something, but luckily, I haven't seen him since.
I'm currently a senior in college, and this story took place during last year. I'm an engineering major, and have taken some pretty difficult classes in recent years. I always study better in the library or classroom than I do in my room, so I would often go find a place to study and get my work done. I remember that this past spring, finals week was approaching, and I had several big projects due, so one Friday night, I decided to go study in a classroom. I know it's not something most people like to do on a Friday night, but I had some plans for the weekend and wanted to get it done beforehand. I went to the engineering hall at about 9 p.m., and when I arrived, it was locked. When this happened, I could call a security guard, and they would unlock the doors for students if you showed them your ID. Then you could use the building to study. I did this, and when the door was unlocked for me, I entered and saw that nobody else was in there. It was strange being in there with all the lights out at night, and I went down one of the first hallways where there were some classrooms, and I entered the first one, which I happened to have a class in, and I turned on the light. Then I found a desk, sat down, and began working. I got really focused and was getting a lot done. Maybe about an hour passed when I heard footsteps come out of nowhere. I looked up to see the classroom door open and a guy walk in. The man was wearing a red sweatshirt, jeans, and a baseball cap. He stood in the doorway and asked me if I minded if he studied in there as well. I was sort of annoyed by this, because there were plenty of other classrooms he could go to, and nobody else was here. I didn't even know who this guy was. I told him sure though, because I didn't want to seem like a jerk. He had a backpack, and set it down at the first desk in the front of the room. Then he sat down at the desk. I went back to work at my desk, which was more towards the back of the room. I sat at that one, because that was where my seat was in class, and I was just more comfortable there. After several minutes, I glanced up at the guy, and I noticed something strange. His backpack was still on the ground next to his desk, and he hadn't taken anything out of it. He was just sitting there in his desk, staring straight forward, it seemed. He wasn't even on his phone. I went back to work, and over time, looked over to him a few more times, and nothing changed. The guy was just making me uncomfortable, and I was losing my focus. Plus, it was getting late, almost 11 p.m., so I decided I would pack it up and leave. I closed my laptop and put it in my backpack, along with my book. I then got up and walked to the door. As I passed by the other guy in the room, I saw that he was still just sitting there, and I could feel his eyes watching me as I left. I walked down the hall and out to the main entrance of the building. That's when I heard footsteps coming down the hallway. I just knew it was the guy, and he was leaving now. Nobody else had been in there. I was getting suspicious of him, and I picked up my pace in walking. I left the building and went out to my car in the parking lot. When I got outside, I noticed there was just one other car in the parking lot, and sure enough, I saw the guy come out the doors and was headed for the car. I drove off to go back to my apartment. It was only about a 5-minute drive, and I lived just a few blocks outside of campus. I drove there with the guy tailing me in his car. I parked in my parking space and got out to go inside. I noticed that the car the guy was in parked a few spaces away from mine, but the guy stayed inside the car. This made me feel a little better for some reason, although I still didn't know what he was doing. But I went inside my apartment and then went up to my window to watch. I knew the guy didn't live here because there were only 8 units, and I had seen everyone else who lived there over the course of the year. Plus, I had never seen his car before. The guy stayed sitting in his car with the lights on for quite some time. So long that even when I was in bed about to fall asleep, I looked out and saw that he was still there. By then, it had to be about 2 a.m. Eventually, I fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up, and when I looked out the window, the guy was not there anymore, thankfully. I went outside, and when I did, I noticed on the outside of my front door, near where the lock was, as well as on the side of the door near where it opened, there were noticeable scratches and small dents that hadn't been there before. I think that guy had tried to break into my apartment during the night while I was asleep. I always wondered who he was and why he did this.
This is a story that happened to me back when I was in college. I'm pretty sure that I was a freshman, and I know that I lived in the dorms. My college was really small. Probably like 2,000 students went there, and the campus had about 5 buildings on it. One day, I got back from a morning class, and then went back to my dorm. I had a little bit of free time until my next class and did some homework. Then I left my dorm room early to go to my final class for the day. I left my dorm and then just had to walk across a courtyard to the building that my class was in. It would only take about 5 minutes to do so. After leaving my dorm, outside it was very quiet. There were virtually no other students outside walking around at all. It wasn't that unusual though because of how small the college was. Plus, just about every class was still in session because it was still about 20 minutes before my class started. I got to the building that my class was in and tried going inside, but for some reason, the door was locked. I found this really odd because this was one of the main entrances to the building. I went to another door, but that one was locked too. In fact, every possible entrance to the building was locked. I knew that our class was supposed to be in there, and I wasn't really sure what was going on. This was an excuse for me to not show up though. I was a good student, but the class was pretty boring and I didn't mind skipping it. I turned and walked back to my dorm. But as I was turning around, in the distance, I saw this one guy running. I thought it was kind of weird. He ran from behind one of the other buildings and then went behind a bush, probably about 100 feet away from me. As I started to walk back to my dorm, I saw the guy come out from the bush and then kind of start to walk in my direction. I turned back and kept walking. My plan was to go back to my dorm and take a nap. I remember getting to the door of my dorm building and opening it up. When I got inside, I was starting to walk to the hallway when I heard somebody trying to open the front door. I looked back and saw the same guy who I had seen outside running. He looked in the window right at me and waved. Then, he knocked on the window a few times. The guy wanted me to let him in. At first, I was going to. I didn't know who he was. I had never seen him before. I thought maybe he lost his key to get in or something. But for some reason, as I took a step in his direction, I just got a bad feeling. Like it would not be good to let him in. I ended up just turning and walking away. I felt kind of bad, but if he didn't live here, I was not supposed to let him in. And if he did live here after all, and maybe lost or forgot his key, he could just go to the offices and get another key fob or get let in. I had never seen him in the building though, so I really wasn't sure. I went upstairs to my dorm room and then fell asleep for an hour or two. As a college student, I was never getting enough sleep, so I took naps all the time. I remember going to the window of my dorm room and looking out to see several police cars around campus. Some had flashing lights, and I was wondering what was going on. I checked my student email and saw the notifications of a lockdown. They were from earlier in the day, and I realized why the building doors had been locked and we hadn't had class. In that first email, there were not many details. We were told to stay in the buildings that we were in and would be notified when the lockdown was over. We were also told that classes were canceled. I'm not sure how, but I was not aware of the lockdown up until that point. I stayed inside my dorm room, and classes were called off for the rest of the day. Just about 30 minutes later, though, the lockdown finally ended. It took a few days for me to get all of the information of what happened, or at least most of it, but a guy who did not attend the college, but lived in the area, apparently made several threats against the university. Somebody who did go to the college knew that guy and reported him. He later showed up on campus, and after seeing him, he was reported and the place got locked down. He was locked out of buildings and hid on campus for several hours. There were multiple reports of him trying to get inside buildings. He happened to be the same person that I had seen outside, and I almost let him into my dorm building. I'm really glad that I didn't.
This happened when I was in high school. It was my sophomore year, and this was during the first semester.
I remember that I was sitting in my history class and we were just watching a documentary. That's what we did most of the time in that class. So right in the middle of it, the door to the classroom opened and this random student walked in. She said my name and she was holding what appeared to be a pass in her hand. So I got up from my desk and walked over to her. When I took the pass from her, it was for me to go to the library. I was confused at first because I was not aware of why I had to go to the library, and I had not been expecting to get any kind of pass at all that day. I showed the pass to my teacher, and then he said that I could go. So I left the classroom and headed out into the hallway. Now, class was about halfway over at this point. The library was basically on the complete other end of the school and was usually very quiet. So I remember walking there, and maybe 2 or 3 minutes in, I heard over the school speakers that we were having a lockdown. Right when I heard this, I wasn't sure what to do. I could try to go to the library, or I could try to go back to my history classroom. It would be a couple of minutes either way. I decided to go to the library. But as I was walking, maybe 30 seconds later, I saw a classroom and I knew that one of my friends was in that class. It was also a teacher that I had later on in the day. So I had the idea to stop and go to that classroom. When I went to the door, I knocked on it, and the teacher was very quick to open the door and let me in. Then I joined that class in huddling towards the back corner of the room. The lights were off, and things were really quiet for the most part. There was a little bit of whispering, and nobody seemed to know what the lockdown was about. However, about 15 minutes later, there was another knock on the classroom door. I think most of us in the room got nervous when we heard it. The teacher went to the door, and soon opened it up. I heard the voice of our vice principal. Then I heard my name get called. I was very surprised and confused. I got up and walked over to the teacher and vice principal, and she told me that I was not in trouble, but I had to go to the office. Now, at this point, even though I was told I wasn't in trouble, I was nervous. We went back to the offices where the principal was and stuff. Then, a very short time later, the lockdown was ended. When I went into the office, I was told some shocking news. Apparently, there was a man inside of the school who didn't work there, and he was the reasoning for the lockdown. But also, the pass that I got from the library was not real. The man somehow walked right into the school and was wearing somewhat professional clothing. I guess that he blended in, and most people must have just assumed that he was a sub or something. He found a kid walking down the hallway who was a teacher's aide, and asked her to deliver the pass to me. He had handwritten the note himself for me to go to the library. After the kid delivered it, the man was waiting around the library for me. What his intentions were, I don't know. I was told about this and asked a bunch of other questions. Eventually, after almost an hour, I was picked up by my mother and brought home. The man had been caught by police after they found him near the library. I had never seen him before, and I had no idea what he was doing. But apparently, he must have seen me if he knew my name and stuff. It still gives me the creeps to think about. When I went to college during my senior year, I lived in a house with one roommate. The house was a little ways off campus, and my roommate's name was Alyssa. A few months into the school year, Alyssa went back home one weekend. That meant that I would be living in the house by myself. The house was not that big, and I didn't think too much of it. But the very first night, something happened. I was by myself in my bedroom, and it was probably like 11 o'clock at night. I was just watching a movie or something, and all of a sudden heard a loud banging on the front door. It wasn't even like somebody knocking. It was like they were banging on the door as hard as they possibly could. I was immediately startled by this. I got up and left my bedroom to go and see who was there. The banging went on for like 15 seconds straight, I would say. When I was walking down the hallway that led to the living room at the front of the house, it stopped. I arrived at the door and looked out of the window. When I did, I saw two men at once. One of them was running to the left and the other was running to the right. I only saw them for like a second before they went out of my view. It was so fast that I had no clue what they were doing, but I did know that they were running through my yard and heading to either side of the house or the back. I moved away to go to the back of the house. There was the kitchen and dining room. I walked back into the dining room and pulled back the curtains to the main window to look out. When I did,
Just about right away, I saw a guy there. He swung what appeared to be a baseball bat right at the window. Thankfully, it did not break on the first hit, but it was very loud. I instantly ran away from that window and into my bedroom. When I got in there, I got my phone and called 911. I also locked my bedroom door. As I was doing these things, I heard several more bangs from the window, and eventually, glass breaking. I was terrified. I just hoped they wouldn't try to enter my room, whoever they were. I heard the two men enter the house and walk into the living room area. I was on the line with 911, begging for them to get there faster. The footsteps of the men inside went around the living room for maybe a minute or two. Then it sounded like they went back towards the rear of the house. Then I stopped hearing them at all. It was like they just left. Things were silent for a while after that. I couldn't believe it. I would say maybe 3 or 4 minutes later, the police arrived. I carefully left my room and let them in the front door. They searched the house and the entire property, but the men were gone. The window was smashed and the house was slightly messed up, but nothing appeared to be stolen. It was all very strange. The police eventually left and I had to get a new window. I still wonder what those guys were doing. Sometimes I think they broke into the wrong house or something, the way they just broke in and then left so fast. My senior year of college, I lived in what I would describe as a typical college house. It was old, sort of run down, had 2 stories and an unfinished basement. I was renting it with one other roommate, a girl named Katie who I had met my freshman year. We had become pretty good friends and shared a dorm our sophomore year of college. So one time, Katie went home for the weekend to see her family. She left on Friday and was going to be gone until Sunday night. On Friday night, I went out with some friends. We would go out on weekends all the time, but this time I had to be up the next morning because I had work, so I decided to try not to stay out too late. Everything about the night was normal, and I returned back home at probably about 11 p.m. When I got home, I went upstairs to get ready for bed. Maybe 20 minutes or so after I got home, there was a knock at the front door. It had to be one of my friends or something because of how late it was. The neighborhood was pretty standard for being about a mile outside of a college campus, and was pretty quiet usually. I walked downstairs and went over to the window to look to see who was there before answering the door. I had a sort of weird feeling about it right from the start though. Maybe it was because of the fact that I was alone, or maybe because if it was a friend, they probably would have contacted me first. They would have texted me or called me before just coming over. When I looked out the window, I saw that there was a man standing there who I didn't recognize. Now, it was really dark out, and I didn't have a great view, but I was still pretty confident that I had never seen this guy before. This seemed strange, and I wasn't going to answer the door, so I went back upstairs and hoped that the guy would just go away. He knocked a couple of more times, but eventually stopped, and I went down to check and see if he was gone. He was, and I felt better. I then went back upstairs and got into bed, but just a few minutes after that, I heard the knocking again. I went down to check, and the guy was there again. He was standing right outside the front door. There was no way that I was answering, but I did want to know what he wanted. I stayed in the living room as the man knocked a few more times. He stayed there for probably 2 or 3 minutes. Then, finally, I heard him walking away. I was just happy that he was gone again, but just hoped that he was gone for good this time. I waited around downstairs for probably 10 minutes, and the guy didn't return. Then I went back upstairs again to finally go to bed. I got into my room, turned out all the lights, and got into bed. I closed my eyes, but no more than a minute later, I heard a noise from downstairs. It was the sound of our back door opening. I couldn't believe it. Instantly, I jumped up and ran over to my door. I locked it and then went back over and grabbed my phone to call the police. I couldn't really hear the guy walking around downstairs, but could just barely hear some noises. When I called the police, I went and hid under my bed. I was lucky to have a lock on my door, but I still didn't know who this guy was or what he was capable of. I was terrified. When I was on the phone with the police, I stayed on the line with them the entire time until they arrived. I didn't hear anything coming from downstairs, and I didn't hear the man coming upstairs either. It took maybe 10 minutes, and then the police were there. They entered through the back door, which was open, but did not find the man after searching the house. They also searched the property as well, but the man was never found.
He must have left before they got there. I was just happy that he was gone. Obviously, I always remembered to lock the back door after that. Still, I wonder who the man was and why he chose our house. I remember back in my junior year of high school, we went on a field trip for one of my classes. This was a field trip that took up 2 entire school days. We had gone to an amusement park for a science class, which was a lot of fun. I also missed a test for another one of my classes, but luckily my teacher was cool and let me make it up. So we scheduled a time after school the next day for me to make up the test. It was for Spanish class, and the classroom was towards the end of one hallway on the north side of the building. When I got out of school, I walked over to the Spanish classrooms. My teacher, Mr. Jordan, was in the classroom, and a couple of other students were there as well. I'm not sure what exactly the other students were doing there. I think they might have been making up an assignment or something like that. Mr. Jordan handed me the test when I got there, and he told me that I could take the test in another room. He said the students were going to be talking to him in his classroom, and he didn't want them to distract me. So he had gotten a key to a nearby Spanish classroom of Mrs. Aceves and said that I could take the test there. So we walked over to the classroom of Mrs. Aceves, and she was already gone for the day. Mr. Jordan told me that he would be in his room if I needed anything. Then he told me good luck and left. I sat down at a random desk and then started the exam. Spanish was a class that I was decent at, but I wasn't expecting to ace the test or anything. However, as I went on with it, things were going really well. I was feeling confident about my answers until when I was almost done, I heard suddenly the school was having a lockdown. Of course, this was strange, partly because it was after school hours. I didn't know that schools had lockdowns when school wasn't in session, but I guess it makes sense. So anyways, I didn't really know what to do. I could stay there in Mrs. Aceves' classroom, or I could try to go back to Mr. Jordan's room, which was just around the corner. After debating it for a moment or two, I decided to go back to Mr. Jordan's room, so I got up and left the classroom. Mr. Jordan's room was literally right around the corner, like 50 feet away. There was only one classroom separating the two. So after I got out into the hallway, I walked over to Mr. Jordan's room. When I got there, I tried opening the door, but it was locked. I was expecting him to come over and open up the door, but literally right after I tried opening it, I heard a noise behind me. It was footsteps, and somebody was walking from around the corner past Mrs. Aceves' room. It was some random woman who was clearly not a student or a teacher. She had really messed up hair, and I just knew right then that this lockdown must have been caused by her. The woman started just walking towards me. Without any more time to wait for Mr. Jordan, I started walking away farther up the hallway. When I did, I saw the woman start to walk after me. She was really creeping me out, and I had no idea what she was doing here. As I walked through the hallway, it was completely silent and nobody else was around. I started walking faster, but could hear the woman still behind me. I turned and went into another hallway, and the woman followed. I was continuing to walk faster and faster, and the woman was doing the same. I didn't want to know what would happen if she caught up with me, so I kept going down one hallway after another. The woman was keeping up with me no matter what I did. I didn't want to risk stopping and trying to go to a classroom because I didn't know which teachers were still at school, and basically all the doors were closed as well. So I kept going. Soon, I made it all the way to the front end of the school. I saw the front doors and I went for them. When I made it outside of the school, the woman did not leave after me and she stayed inside. After that, I just ran for my car and went home. I learned later on that the woman was in fact the cause of the lockdown. I'm not sure what she did, but the police were called for her and the school was locked down. Except the police showed up at the entrance that the woman was seen by, which was not the main entrance that I left out of. I guess Mr. Jordan was literally walking to the door to unlock it when I walked away. He let me finish the test the following day after school, and I'm really glad that the woman never caught up with me.
When I went to college, I went to a large university with about 40,000 students. It was a big campus, and I went there for 4 years. For some more background, I'm a female, and this happened in my junior year.
It was in the fall and had been a pretty normal school year to that point. During that time, I lived a little ways off campus in an apartment that I rented with 2 other roommates. Most of the classes that I went to had quite a few other students in them. We would have class in large rooms with many seats, and it was hard to know all of the other students in each class. In one class that I had, I usually got there early and sat in the same spot. It was kind of towards the back and on one end near the aisle. I would be one of the first students to class, and a few weeks into the semester, a guy started sitting next to me. He also started talking to me every time that he sat there, and I wasn't happy about this. He was rude and annoying and wouldn't leave me alone. He never introduced himself to me, but I found out that his name was Jake. Every time that he talked to me, he would say that I should come over to his place, and I would always say no to him. It only went on for like 2 weeks when he would sit by me. It felt like longer though, because he would never pay attention to class like I tried to. He would talk to me, or just go on his phone, and it was really distracting. When I told him that he was being annoying, he didn't stop until like the 5th time that I told him. He finally did stop though, and also stopped showing up to class. I would see him after class though, and he kept trying to talk to me. Soon though, I stopped seeing him altogether. I didn't really know anything about him, but once I stopped seeing him, I was glad. I didn't give it much more thought. But no more than a week after I stopped seeing him altogether, he began reaching out to me on social media. He first added me on Snapchat. I'm not sure how he got my username, but after he added me, I added him back, not knowing that it was the same Jake. When he started snapping me, I realized who it was. I did not reply, and I deleted him. He then moved to Instagram and started sending me direct messages. I didn't respond, and then he started sending me texts. I had no interest in him at all, so I blocked him on all platforms. Now, it wasn't just the fact that I didn't like him. He came across as really sketchy. Something about him definitely gave me a bad feeling. After I blocked him, I thought that my problems were over. I figured the guy would leave me alone and move on. For several days, I didn't hear from him or see him. But then, one night, I happened to be at home at my apartment by myself. Both of my 2 roommates were gone. One was at work, and the other was at her boyfriend's. There was then a knock on the door. It was like 9 o'clock at night, so this was kind of weird. Our apartment was on the 2nd level of 2, but it also opened up to the outdoors and a walkway. It was kind of like a motel if I had to describe it, but it was apartments. I walked over and looked out the window to see Jake standing there. I had a really bad feeling right away. How did he know where I lived? I had no idea, but there was no way that I was answering the door for this guy. My first thought was to try and ignore it. I calmly walked away into the hallway and then my bedroom. I heard the knocking again coming from the front door, but I still ignored it. After probably 5 minutes of not hearing any more knocking sounds, I left my bedroom. But when I got into the living room, I saw Jake standing there, but leaning down and looking into our window. We had some curtains, but they didn't really cover the whole window. It wasn't that hard to see in. He was looking right at me. My first reaction was to move quickly back into my bedroom. As I was walking away, he started banging on the glass. I had a really bad feeling and was afraid that he was going to break in. He banged on the glass again, even harder than before. At that point, I decided to call the police. Clearly, he could see that I did not want to talk to him and I wanted him to go away. I dialed 911 and hid in my bedroom as I told the operator the situation and what was going on. I was told that the police would be there shortly. Meanwhile, I wasn't really hearing anything like knocks on the window or door. I got curious as I waited and went out into the hallway and looked around the corner. When I did, I saw that he was still there and looking through the window like before. I went back into my bedroom and did not come out until I was sure that the police were there. They arrived pretty fast, and Jake was still at my door. I heard them talking to him and went into my living room. They basically talked to Jake and told him not to bother me again in any way. He agreed, and then they sent him on his way. Then I talked to the officers and told them about what had happened. I hoped that this incident would cause Jake to leave me alone once and for all, and for the next week or so, I did not see him or hear from him. I thought that everything was good again. Probably like a week and a half later, I had a normal school day. I went to one of my classes like I always did. Maybe 10 minutes into it, I heard this weird noise come over the class speakers. The professor stopped what he was doing and then went to look at his phone. There was then an announcement that campus was being locked down. This seemed really strange, and everyone was confused. All of the people in the class seemingly started talking at once. The professor walked over to all of the doors, closed them, and locked them. He told us that we could not leave until the lockdown was over. I tried to find out what was going on, but nobody really seemed to know anything. This went on for probably 30 minutes or longer. Finally, it was over, and the professor ended class early. After that, I went home. I found out that the lockdown was caused when somebody spotted a man who happened to be Jake walking on campus, but he was seen with what appeared to be a gun. It was reported, and there was immediately a lockdown followed by an investigation. I guess Jake tried to go in a building that was locked and then left campus, but police caught up with him after a campus security guard saw him walking away. Nobody was harmed or anything, but Jake didn't even go to our school. I couldn't help but wonder if he was trying to go after me. I had, after all, called the police on him. Luckily, though, he was spotted pretty quickly and nothing happened. It still really creeps me out to think about it, though. A few years ago, when I was in college, I did quite a bit of studying. I took school very serious and needed to spend extra time on certain subjects. Sometimes I would go to study halls and work on assignments late into the night. I could just focus better there, and I think a lot of students had similar feelings. I would often see other people working on things late. Now, I went to a pretty large university. The campus was big, and there were a lot of different buildings. One Friday night, I went to one of the study halls that I had classes in to get work done. With it being a weekend, there were not as many people around campus at night. When I was in the building, I didn't see anybody else at all. I found an empty classroom and then went inside. Then I sat down at a table, took out my laptop and notes, and began working. This went on for several hours. I would often lose track of time when I was working hard. I remember at one point, I heard a door open and shut off in the distance. When I heard it, I just figured someone else was in the building, and I didn't give it much thought. But as I kept working, I soon heard footsteps approaching my classroom. I could see the front door to the classroom with a small window in it. I looked over and soon saw somebody appear in the window. It was a guy who I didn't recognize. He looked in and then moved away out of sight. I figured he was looking for a classroom that was empty to study or work in. I went back to what I was doing after that. Probably about a minute or two later, I suddenly heard the classroom door open up. I looked up and saw that the same guy was back. I watched him enter the room, but then looked back to my laptop. I was kind of annoyed that this guy was coming in here. Most of the classrooms in this building were about the same. He could have gone to any other one, but he was going to the one that I was in. I was focusing on my work for the next minute or so, when I realized that I never heard the guy sit down. I glanced back up and saw that he was still standing there, right inside the door. He was kind of looking ahead, not directly at me. Then he glanced over at me, but I couldn't tell what he was doing. It was creeping me out because he was just standing there. He didn't say anything at all either. I decided that I would just leave. I packed up my laptop and notes and then got up. The guy was still standing there. I asked him if he was okay, but he didn't answer me. I walked over closer to him and once more asked him if everything was all right. He finally moved and backed away from me and gave me a kind of dirty look, but still didn't say anything. Then I just left the classroom. I didn't know what to make of his weird behavior. Not long after leaving the classroom, I was walking down the hallway. That's when I heard the door opening to the classroom that I had just been in. I saw the guy leaving and starting to walk in my direction. I was really creeped out and I walked faster. He followed me all the way to the entrance of the building. Then I left, and when I was out of the building, sprinted to my car in the parking lot. I saw the guy leave the building and I drove away. Luckily, I didn't see him get into a car. After that time, I didn't study in that building late at night again. When I was in high school, I considered myself to be a pretty easygoing guy. I had a good friend group, which I would hang out with sometimes, but I remember that a new kid came into our school my junior year. His name was Brad. and I didn't like him at all from the start. He just seemed like an arrogant guy with a really short attention span. I also had 2 classes with him. I just remember always seeing him on his phone during class, and the teacher would get mad at him about it. He seemed to not care about class at all, and also skipped a lot. The few times that I was around him because of a group project that I got put in with him, he did none of the work. He was always making excuses and stuff. And one time, he even said that he couldn't do any work that day because his vape broke. I thought he was joking, but he actually did nothing the entire time that day. So anyways, I tried to avoid him for the most part, but he somehow became friends with some of the guys in my friend group. So I ended up hanging out with him in a group setting like twice. I didn't know he would be there, and he was being annoying the whole time like always. Literally the first time I was hanging out with my friends and he was there in the lunchroom, he made fun of my shoes. They were just average Nike athletic shoes, but a little worn. I didn't care what he thought, but it seemed like he was just trying to roast me to impress my friends or something. So clearly we didn't get along. Then we ended up actually getting into it a little bit during gym class one day. We were playing floor hockey, and I was the goalie and he was on the other team. He basically picked up the goal and moved it to try to score. So then I picked up the goal and I threw it, and then he started getting in my face and some other kids held him back. It was more about the fact that we didn't like each other than we really cared about a gym class game. But I remember not long after this incident, one of my friends told me that Brad really hated me. I already had a hunch, and I said that I didn't like him either one bit. I tried to stay away from him, but sometimes it was hard with us having classes together and mutual friends. I didn't know why any of my friends spent time with him anyways. But one night, I was at home, when one of my friends, Jamie, texted me saying he needed a ride. He told me that he was at the high school and told me to come to Lower Lot. I didn't really want to go at first, but he told me he would buy me Taco Bell if I did. The school was a little less than 10 minutes away, so it wasn't that big of a deal. I told my parents I had to give Jamie a ride home, and then I left. I think it was about 8:30 p.m. or maybe 9 at this point. I drove to Lower Lot, which was sort of far from the school, but you didn't need a pass to park there. I pulled in and saw one other car in the parking lot. After parking in one of the spaces, I didn't see Jamie anywhere though. I texted him asking where he was. When I did this, I heard someone talking from my left. I looked over and saw Brad there. He was telling me to get out of my car. I was so annoyed to see him, but I wanted to know what he wanted, so I got out of my car. After I was out, his tone changed even more. He walked up really fast and got in my face. It was clear that he wanted to fight me, and he pushed me a little. I told Brad I didn't want to fight him, I was just there to pick up my friend. But after he shoved me, I pushed him back a little. Right after that though, I saw somebody else emerge from behind what I assumed was Brad's car. It was the only other car in the parking lot. I had no idea who this guy was, but I gathered that he was a friend of Brad. He didn't go to our school though. This guy started walking towards me and cursing me out. Now this wasn't fair. If Brad wanted to fight me, that's one thing, but don't bring your friend so it's 2-on-1. I asked who this guy was, and Brad's friend then came up and shoved me. I took one swing at Brad, and then his friend went around and hit me from behind. I fell to the ground, and Brad kicked me in the leg when I was down. After that, I got up as fast as I could and started running off. They immediately started chasing after me. I was a lot faster than they were though. I ran into a grassy area next to the high school, and then off school property into a woods. The entire time I heard them chasing after me, but I was pulling away. After running into the woods, it got very dark. I couldn't see much, but I kept going through trees and heard Brad and his friend reach the edge of the woods. The woods was getting pretty thick, and they called for me to come out, but did not seem to enter the woods themselves. I waited in there for a while and hid behind a tree. After about 5 minutes, I left the woods and didn't see them. I'm not sure where they went, but I went back to the parking lot and both cars were still there. I went back to mine and then I drove home. After getting back, I texted Jamie and cursed him out. He claimed that he didn't know Brad wanted to fight me, and also claimed that he didn't know Brad's friend. He told me Brad told him to say what he did, because Brad really wanted to talk to me and I wouldn't respond to him. It was a lie because Brad never reached out to me at all. I do believe Jamie, but it was still messed up for him to say that to me. Over the next few days, I didn't see Brad at all. He wasn't in classes, and I was happy about that. In fact, I never saw him again after that. He didn't show up to class anymore at all. I'm not sure if he just kept skipping class until he got expelled or if he changed schools again. Either way, I'm glad I don't have to see him anymore.
Last year, I was a freshman in college. I lived in a dorm by myself. I enjoyed not having a roommate because I had more space to myself and could come and go as I pleased. The dorm building was very old, and I lived on the 4th floor. My hallway was almost all people without roommates, so it was pretty quiet most of the time. One night, I was doing some studying late at night at my desk. At about 11 p.m., I turned off my lamp and decided to go to bed. But right after I turned my light off, I heard a noise come from the corner of my room. I turned my light right back on. It was my water bottle falling off my dresser. I was so confused as to how this could have happened. It couldn't have been the wind because my window was closed. I went over and put my bottle back on the dresser and then went to go brush my teeth. When I came back, the bottle was on the floor again. I was a little bit creeped out. I moved the bottle and then got in bed to go to sleep. Just when I was getting really relaxed and about to fall asleep, I heard my doorknob being turned. I looked up to see the door being opened slowly. Now I was extremely creeped out. I had locked the door like I always do when I got back. I walked out and looked into the hallway. It was empty. I went back to my room and shut the door and turned all of the lights on. I wasn't able to fall asleep for about another hour. The next day, I told some of the guys that live on my floor what happened, and they said that some similar things have happened to them. The college campus I live on is very old and is said to be haunted. I have always been skeptical about that sort of stuff, but what I witnessed I have no explanation for.
This happened back when I was in high school. It was during my senior year in the fall semester. I remember that I had study hall, and during this time I would often go to the library. We were allowed to, but I was one of the only students that did. Most of the other kids liked to stay in their classroom and work there. If I didn't have any homework, I would stay in the classroom myself. But when I was working on stuff, I'd go to the library because it was much easier to focus there. So one day, I was in the library doing homework during study hall. I was listening to music on my headphones, and I was able to finish my homework with a little bit of time left in class. I was going to leave the library early to go to my locker before the final class of the day. At my high school, the rules were not really that strict. You didn't even really need a pass to walk in the hallways during class periods. So I headed out from the library, I think about 3 or 4 minutes before class would be let out. I walked back to my locker, which took a few minutes. Then I put my books away and got the one for my final class. Then I stood around at my locker and looked at the time. Class was out by now, but I was not seeing any students in the hallways. This made me a bit confused. Now I took my headphones out, which had been in the entire time playing music. Things were completely silent. I was really confused, so I just walked to my next classroom. But when I got there, the door was locked. At this point, I still didn't think of a lockdown. I started heading back to my locker, thinking of what could possibly be going on. I hadn't heard the lockdown announcement because I had my headphones in. When I made it back to my locker and saw that the halls were still empty, I checked my watch and phone for the time. My times were not off, and I matched them with the school clock. I just didn't understand where everybody was. Then, I finally realized that there must be a lockdown going on. At first, I was thinking and hoping that maybe it was a drill. So I started to go to my classroom again and was going to knock on the door. My teacher would then be able to let me in. I had to go down a couple of hallways to get there. When I went down one, I passed by a staircase and I heard multiple people walking down. After I passed it, I looked back and I saw these 3 men going down the stairs. Each of the 3 guys were wearing all black clothing and ski masks. Instantly, I had a bad feeling about it. I kept walking and then quickly went around a corner. But when I did, I looked back for a moment and saw the 3 guys looking in my direction and starting to walk towards me. They were a long ways back, but this was still terrifying. At this point, I could only assume that the school was locked down because of them. I quickly went around the corner and just hoped that the guys wouldn't follow me. But as I made it to the end of that hallway, I looked back. I thought for a moment that I was good, but then I noticed all three of the men walking around the corner and coming towards me. I was terrified. I started walking extremely fast to the end of the hallway that I was in. When I made it towards the end though, I recognized a classroom. It was one of a teacher that I had previously had who I knew pretty well. It was a risk to stop, but I decided to. I started knocking on the door extremely fast. I also called out the teacher's name. For a few seconds, there was nothing. I tried the door, but of course, it was locked. I turned and saw the men coming around this corner too. They looked right at me. For a moment, I was about to turn and run, but then the door opened. I quickly went inside and then shut the door and locked it behind me. The men did not try entering the room or knock on the door, so they must have passed by. But I'm still confident that the guys were going after me until I got in the classroom. The lockdown continued for a while after that. I told the teacher about the guys, and she called it in to somebody. Eventually, after like 30 more minutes, the lockdown finally ended. The three men left the school, but were tracked down a ways away. I really never learned much more about it than that. I just know that it was one of the scariest moments of my life when I saw those guys in the hallway. I'm really glad that everybody was okay.
I'm a female, and this happened when I was in high school. My friends and I used to like to go to the high school football games on Friday nights. We would watch our friends play in the game, and there was a really large student section in the bleachers. It was always a good time, and then I would often hang out with my friends afterwards. One time, I went with two of my friends to a high school football home game. Where I'm from, the high school football games are always a huge deal. Just about the entire city shows up, and it's always packed. Plus, our team is usually pretty good. We got there early and went into the student section. During the game, we mostly stayed there, but a couple of times we got up and walked around. It was very crowded. After the game, we hung around for a little while, and then we were going to leave to go to one of my friend's houses. Then we were going to spend the night there. She lived about 10 minutes away from the school. I was driving, so we got into my car and then started to leave. There was a lot of traffic and a big traffic jam. It took probably 10 minutes just to get off of the main street. Once we were, though, it was smooth sailing, but we noticed that there was a car driving right behind us. When we turned, the car turned after us. We automatically assumed that it was one of our friends from school being funny. None of us could tell who it was, though, because it was dark out. We were trying to guess, but I honestly didn't recognize the car at all. It was just a normal sedan, but kind of small and was black. It stayed behind us for a while, and then we turned, and it turned right after us. It continued to stay right on our tail until we arrived on my friend's street. I drove to her house and pulled over on the side of the road in front of it. The car pulled over behind us. I was actually really surprised that the car followed us all the way back. We were all still convinced at this point that it was a classmate, though. High school kids will do some crazy things sometimes just for a laugh or whatever. So after we parked, we started to get out of the car. I remember getting out and starting to walk over to the car to see who it was. But then the driver's door opened, and I saw a man start to get out. He was no high school kid. This guy was at least 30, and I had never seen him before. Suddenly, I had a really bad feeling, and I think the rest of my friends did too. Instead of trying to run inside or anything, all three of us got back in my car at once. The guy was still walking towards us. I locked all the doors, and the man arrived at one of the back doors and tried opening it. When he did, I slammed my foot on the gas and drove away. My friends told me that he was going back to his car and to hurry. I drove about as fast as I could on that residential road. I went around a corner, and then there was this park with a path through it. I slammed on my brakes, slowed down, and then turned onto the path. It was not a street, and cars were not supposed to go on it, but it was wide enough that one could. I don't know how I got this idea, but I just did, and I drove down the path. The park was not very big, and obviously nobody was there with it being late at night. I cut through this path to the other side where it connected to a street in another nearby neighborhood. Then I took a left, and we could no longer see the guy. He would have no idea of where we were going at that point. I drove back to my house after that,
and we hung out there for a little while until finally we went back to my friend's place. That made for the craziest high school football game experience I ever had.
I went to a private university in college. It was very nice and I really enjoyed going there, but I will never forget this creepy incident. One day, I got back from the cafeteria at about 7 p.m. As I was walking up to my dorm room, I saw a man walking in the hallways. I should mention that I am a female and my entire dorm building was female only. I guessed he was just visiting somebody, which is not that strange at all, but the weird part was that the man appeared to be in his 30s. Nevertheless, I ignored him and walked to my room. It was a Friday and my roommate had gone home for the weekend. I got all my homework done for the weekend and then started watching Netflix. About an hour into that, I left my room to go to the bathroom. It was right across the hall, which was very nice. I got back to my room and unpaused my show and got back into it. 10 minutes or so went by and I heard something from the other side of my room. I was too focused on the show to really notice it. That is, until I heard it again, and this time it was louder. I turned my head to see what it was, and I couldn't believe what I saw. It was a man coming out from behind my roommate's desk. In fact, it was the man that I saw in the hallway earlier. He had a smile on his face and was walking right towards me. I screamed and ran for the door as fast as I could. I was just barely able to make it out of my room, and I slammed the door on the man behind me and ran away down the hall. He did not chase after me. I heard him yell at me that it was a mistake and he thought that I was someone else. I wasn't buying that from the creepy smile he had on his face. I ran to a friend's dorm who lived on the floor above mine, and we called the campus police. It didn't take long for them to arrive, and they found the man leaving the building when they got there. It turns out someone let him in the building, and he got in my room because I had left my door unlocked when I went to use the restroom. This story happened several years back when I was in college. I attended a very large and old university, and was coming to the end of a semester. I decided to go to one of the engineering buildings one night, where one of my classrooms were, so I could study for the final test. I had a lot of work to do, and I wanted to be free of all distractions. I was an engineering student, and one of our buildings let you go into the classrooms if there wasn't a class going on, so I went in and began studying. I studied for hours and hours, and in the process, I completely lost track of time. I started at about 8 p.m., and I ended up making a lot of good progress and was almost done when I heard a knock come from the door I was at. I was a little bit startled, but I thought maybe a janitor wanted to clean the room I was in or something. I looked at the clock and saw it was just past midnight. Nobody had been in the building at all when I got there, so I looked out the door, but I didn't see anybody. I thought it was a little strange, so I walked over to the door and looked out. The hallway was completely empty. Then I opened the door and looked out of it into the mostly dark hallway. Then, as my eyes looked to the end of the hall about 50 feet away, I saw a man's head peeking out almost sideways from around the corner. He was smiling at me in the creepiest way. He looked to be at least 40 years old. It was a very creepy sight, and the way he was smiling with his eyes so wide at me, he looked to be completely insane. Then, he slowly stuck his head out farther and farther from the corner, and I saw that he appeared to be wearing a suit and a tie. It just seemed so odd and creepy. He kept his eyes locked on mine for a good 5 to 10 seconds. Then, he suddenly jolted back behind the wall where he was. I had no interest in staying in that building any longer. I quickly went back into the classroom and gathered my things into my backpack. I walked out into the hall and made sure that the man wasn't there.
I walked as fast as I could down the hallway and out of the building. Once I got outside, I felt much safer. I started walking quickly through campus to get back to my place, but before I got too far away from the building, I turned around and looked back at it. I saw on the second floor front window, the man was there. He was looking at me with the same creepy smile and wide eyes and slowly waving at me. I turned and ran all the way back home. Every time I had to go back to that building for a class after that, I was always a little creeped out. I never went back to that building at night again.
The story I'm about to share with you all started when I was a freshman in high school. I had gotten to know a lot of kids and met this one kid named TJ who happened to be on the baseball and football team with me. Keep in mind, I had only known him for a few months. One day, sometime during the first few months of my freshman year, I decided to go to TJ's house. I went with my other friend who I had known since I was young. We'll call him Finn. Key details to the story is I had been to TJ's house a few times before and slept over several times as well. His parents knew me, and my parents knew TJ's parents. When I got to TJ's house, we waited for Finn to get dropped off. When he did, we all decided to go to a nearby school because some of TJ's friends were supposedly goofing off on the roof of the school. When TJ's friends he knew weren't there, we decided to walk to the other side of the neighborhood TJ lived in. To get to the other side of the neighborhood, we cut through a community college that was small. At this point, I did not know where we were going and asked TJ, but he didn't give me a response. My phone was about to die, and I told TJ this, and he said that I could charge it later. As we were halfway through the community college, we surprisingly ran into 5 friends of TJ's. 3 of them I had briefly met once before, and they were the type of people where bad follows them. The other 2 friends of TJ's were kids I had never seen before or met. I asked TJ where we were going, and he said one of his friend's house. I got a weird feeling, as my phone was dead at this point and it was dark out. I was walking when one of TJ's friends thought I was talking bad about his mom, but I hadn't said a word about his mom at all. Then TJ insisted that I did, and shortly after, TJ and his other friends insisted that we fought. Mind you, Finn, my good friend, did not say anything and stood there not knowing what to do. I've been in fights before and can hold my ground. One of TJ's friends at this point was circling me and got in my face and shoved me. I turned, and his friend threw a punch at me and missed, and then I felt someone punch me with my back turned. I eventually tossed one of the guys to the ground and had him pinned, but the other guy then kicked at me. The guy I had pinned down was now on top of me and punched me, and one of my contacts fell out and I couldn't see. I finally got up and was bleeding from the eye when TJ and 2 of his friends insisted we go round 2 and started placing bets. I finally walked away, and as I was, TJ took a photo of me, and somebody else I guess had a video of the fight. Later on, it got passed around everyone on the baseball team, and everybody was angry at TJ for not helping me. Anyways, we eventually walked back to TJ's house where Finn's mom was waiting to pick him up. The parents found out I was in a fight, but was more worried about TJ than me, and I was bleeding. My parents found out and were mad. We filed a police report on one of TJ's friends that basically assaulted me and attacked me. Days later, TJ was taken to a mental hospital because he allegedly wanted to come to school and shoot me in the back of the head in class. I took him to court for a restraining order, but the judge did not pass it and told us to make up and get over it. I realized that I was lured into the dark area of the community college to most likely get harmed. Finn did not help me, and I haven't talked to him since. I blocked TJ on everything and haven't seen him since either. I hope TJ doesn't do this to anyone else again, but it's a lesson that you might not know a friend as well as you think.
When I was in high school, I played football and baseball. During the wintertime, I would be in before-school weightlifting. This particular story took place my sophomore year. One day, my mom dropped me off early at about 6 o'clock in the morning. Our lifting went from 6:30 to 7:30, so it was a very early day for me. I went in the entrance that I always did, which was on the east side of the school. It was the easiest for my mom to just drive up and drop me off at. It also happened to be the complete opposite end of the school from where the gym was, so when I walked to lifting, it would always be very quiet. On this day, however, when I passed by the social studies hallway, I noticed that the teacher's lounge light was on and I could see right in. That was rare because the lounges had blinds that were almost always down and I had never really seen into one. It got my attention, so I walked over to the window and looked inside. I saw a few couches and a microwave. Typical stuff, but then I saw a man in there. He wasn't a teacher from our school though. He was facing a bookshelf and appeared to be looking through the books, but by the way he was dressed and the looks of him, he didn't seem to be a teacher or a high school worker. He was wearing just a t-shirt and jeans and didn't look very well put together. Still, I was tired and figured he must work for the school or something, and I went on with my walk to lifting. After weightlifting, I went to my daily classes, and it was a pretty normal day. That is, until second hour, when out of nowhere, we got an announcement over the school intercom that we were on a lockdown. I was in English class, and the teacher locked the door and told us all to remain seated. None of us knew what was going on, and we all asked a lot of questions, but couldn't get a clear answer. Things grew very quiet, and I could tell by the look on my teacher, Mrs. Anderson's face, that it was serious. She ended up turning off the lights in our classroom. There was only about 15 kids in my class, and probably 400 in the whole school, so we knew this had to be fairly serious. We remained seated and were completely silent for what felt like a long time. At one point, we saw the silhouette of a man walk in front of our door, but couldn't tell who he was, and then he walked away. We heard some shouting only a couple of minutes later, and after about 20 more minutes, the lockdown was finally lifted. I later came to find out that the man that I had seen in the teacher's lounge was a former student who had graduated about 10 years prior. He was high on drugs and angry at one of the social studies teachers for some reason. He had hid under a couch in the teacher's lounge until the teacher came in and he attacked him. He then ran out into the halls, causing the lockdown, but was caught by police shortly after. I felt bad that I hadn't reported the man earlier, and I told the principal my story. She said that it wasn't my fault, and the teacher who was attacked was just fine and had no serious injuries.
I had one really scary experience during my time in college. It happened during my sophomore year. I attended a school that was somewhat small. You could walk across the entire campus in probably 20 minutes or less. I lived in one of the dorm buildings, and I remember that year was my toughest class schedule. Sometimes I would be doing homework late at night in one of the buildings on campus. One night in particular, I was working on a lab assignment. It went pretty late, until almost midnight. When I was finally done, I packed up all my stuff and left. The building was about completely empty, and most of the lights were off. After leaving, campus was like a ghost town. I had to walk about 10 minutes to get back to my dorm building. As I was going through a courtyard a few minutes in, is when I saw this guy. He was kind of walking along the side of a building that I had sort of just passed. I'm not really sure why I even looked over in that direction. He didn't look like a normal student or employee of the college though. The strange thing about him was that it looked like he was wearing a mask. I could barely see him at all, but I did see that he was wearing what appeared to be a ski mask. I just kind of thought that it was strange, but kept walking. Probably 2 minutes later though, I got this odd feeling and looked behind me. I saw the guy walking, and he was a really long ways back, but he was walking the same way I was. I got worried because he hadn't been walking that direction before. I hoped that he wasn't following me or something. When I got closer to my dorm building, I sort of looked behind me again. He was still there. I couldn't really hear him walking because he was so far back, but I could sense him. I tried to walk a little bit faster, and I still felt like I could make it to my dorm okay. I just had a little bit farther to go. For the next couple of minutes, I did not look behind me, and I didn't hear the guy either. Then, when my dorm building was in sight, I glanced over my shoulder. Not only could I still see the guy, but he was now much closer to me. Now he was maybe 50 feet behind me, or a little more. I got really nervous when I saw that. I felt like he was definitely following me. Still, I knew that I could make it to my dorm before he did.
At last, I arrived at my building. I got to the first door and then used my key fob to get into the second set of doors. I made sure that the door closed right behind me after I made it in. The man wasn't inside yet at all, and I felt like I had possibly escaped from a bad situation. After walking through the empty lobby into the first hallway, I saw a student seemingly leaving, and I passed by them in the hallway. After they walked past me, I'm not sure where they were going. I continued to the end of the hallway where the stairs were. We didn't have an elevator in my dorm, and my room was on the 4th floor. But I had this crazy thought when I was walking down the hallway. What if whoever was leaving the dorm accidentally lets that guy into the building? Probably like 5 seconds after this thought, I heard the door opening in the distance. Now I was a good ways down the hall, but not at the stairs yet. Moments later, I heard somebody enter the hallway from the lobby. I looked over and saw the same masked man. He was walking really fast and heading in my direction. I quickly went into the stairwell and ran up the stairs as fast as I possibly could. About the time I reached the 4th floor, I heard the guy entering the stairwell. Then I sprinted down the hallway and got to my room. As I was entering, the man reached the top of the stairs. He didn't come to my room or anything. I kept watching out the people. I decided to call the police and let them know what happened. They came out and searched the dorm building. They found the guy hiding in the basement. He was not a student, and I'm not sure what he was doing on campus. The student that left the dorm after I entered did in fact let him in. Apparently, the guy removed his ski mask and wasn't wearing it when he was let in. Then he must have put it back on after arriving inside. The person leaving must have thought he was just a student or just didn't notice. That experience made me scared to go out at night on campus for a while. Luckily, nothing like that happened again.
I remember back when I was in high school, during my junior year, a new kid joined 2 of my classes about midway through the semester. It was the first semester of the school year, and out of nowhere he was just in my class one day. His name was Justin, and he sat next to me in one of the classes because there happened to be an open seat. I didn't really know where he had come from or why he had suddenly started going to my school, but as the semester went on, I sort of became friends with him. We didn't really have much in common, and he seemed a little bit weird, but we did sit next to each other in a class and also had the other class together, so he would often talk to me during class, and we would sometimes talk in the other one as well. Overall, I never knew him very well. I did ask him a few questions about himself. For example, I asked him what school he had come from before my high school. I also asked him if he had just moved to the area. He named a school that I had never heard of before, and said that he had recently moved there. But aside from that, he didn't really share much about himself. Still, I was friendly with him, and I didn't mind talking to him here and there. He did get a little bit annoying though, because during the class where we sat next to each other, he would make a lot of comments. I figured that I might be one of the first people that he met in our city though. After probably like 2 or 3 weeks of him going to the school, he invited me to hang out. He said that I should come over to his house that night around 7 or 8. At first, in my head, I wasn't really sure if I wanted to, but I said yes because I realized I may as well hang out with him at least once. After school, I went home, and then he texted me at some time that night to come over. He gave me his address, and I got directions to go there. I had a car at this point, and I drove to Justin's house, which took maybe 10 minutes. He lived in a neighborhood that was not the greatest, but had a lot of smaller houses in it. I parked and then texted Justin that I was there. He did not respond right away, so I got out of the car and then walked to the front door and knocked on it. There was no response for at least a minute. I texted Justin again and he told me to come inside, so I opened the door, which was unlocked, and then went in. After getting inside of his house, at first it seemed like nobody was home. Basically all the lights were off, and I did not think that his parents were there. I called out saying hi, but didn't hear anything back at all. But there was what appeared to be a door leading to the basement that was open a little. So I took a couple of steps inside of his house, and then I started to hear a noise. It sounded like a TV or maybe a video game, but I could barely hear it, and it was coming from far away. When I got closer to the basement door, I realized that's where the sound was coming from. I figured Justin must be playing video games down in the basement,
because I knew that he liked to play COD. I started heading down the basement stairs. The farther down I got, the louder the noises were, and I knew Justin had to be there. However, it was completely dark down there, and I literally could barely see anything. I didn't know where the light switches were or anything, so I just followed the sounds. Soon, I made it to the bottom of the stairs and headed to what looked like a hallway. I could only see some edges of the walls. As I was walking over there, I loudly asked Justin where he was and said that I was there, but I didn't get a response, which seemed kind of weird. A few seconds after that, as I was walking, I suddenly felt myself getting shoved from behind. I was pushed so hard that I fell forward onto the ground. After falling down, I heard some laughter from whoever pushed me. I looked, but it was so dark that I couldn't see who it was. They also quickly moved away, and I started to get to my feet, but then I was pushed again from behind. Then, when I was down, I got kicked in the legs. I heard more laughter from whoever this was. I quickly got to my feet again, and this time ran away to try to go back to the stairs. I heard somebody else moving down there, and I tried my best not to run into anything. I never thought to take out my phone and use it for light or anything, but I also didn't really have much time for that. After running back towards the stairs, I was luckily able to make it. I sort of tripped over the first part of the stairs, but I caught myself. I then ran up and left the house. I ran all the way back to my car and then drove home. I texted Justin when I got back, asking him what on earth that was all about. He didn't respond though. The next day was a Saturday, so we didn't have school, and the following Monday he was in class. However, I did not feel like saying anything to him and just ignored him, and he did the same to me. Normally he would talk to me and was borderline annoying because I didn't really have much interest in many of the things he would talk about. This day he said nothing at all, and it remained that way for the next few days as well. And randomly after that, he just wasn't in class anymore. He must have changed schools again or something, and I never saw him again. I still wonder what went on in his basement. I believe that was him pushing me, and it makes me angry. I'm glad that I was able to get away though. My first year of college, I had gotten close with a group of friends who were into urban exploring. I had never done it before, but most of my friends enjoyed exploring old, abandoned buildings, and as long as it wasn't a place which seemed super dangerous, I would go. There was a perfect opportunity right on our campus for us to explore. An abandoned, rundown theater building that had been there for many years was finally getting demolished in a few months. My friends decided that they wanted to check it out before it was gone. The 5 of us who were going to explore that night left at midnight for the theater. We found some small back doors, and after a couple hard pushes on the door, it burst open and we had our way inside the theater. I have no idea what year this theater was built or when it was abandoned, but it was in pretty bad shape. There was a ton of junk everywhere. The audience area was filled with old theater props and other storage items, which is what most of us spent our time exploring. One of our friends, I'll call him Jake, had wandered over to the storage area. The stage had multiple gaping holes in it, and we warned Jake to be careful up there. Suddenly, we heard a loud cracking coming from the stage. We looked over to see that a large portion of the stage had caved in and fallen, taking Jake down with it. Racing over towards the edge of the stage, we were all relieved to see Jake standing up, brushing dust off himself, as he appeared uninjured. He had fallen about 10 feet, down into a hallway below the stage that had doors leading to multiple dressing rooms and storage rooms. Before we could even ask Jake if he was okay, we heard a loud banging echoing throughout the whole lower level of the theater, shaking the walls. We watched as a figure sprinted out into the hallway and out a door into the night outside the theater. I was freaked out and ready to call it a night, but the others wanted to explore the dressing rooms down the hallway. I followed the group and we checked room after room. Eventually, we opened a door leading into a room, and Jake was the first person to peek his head inside, and he turned around gagging. Shining our flashlights through the door of the room, it revealed a makeshift bedroom setup with a rickety old wooden bed and some chairs and other random items in the room. On the ground, there were remains of dead animals that could be seen, mostly squirrels and rabbits. The smell flowing from the room into the hallway was horrid, and we quickly closed the door and we finally all agreed on heading back home for the night. We left through the back door. The the same way we had seen the figure run earlier, and could see their footsteps in the snow retreating away from the theater. I'm sure they were hiding out there somewhere waiting for us to leave the theater. The old theater got demolished a couple of months later. I wonder to this day if that critter-eating dweller had moved on to somewhere else nearby or on the college campus. One of my first weekends in college, my newly acquired friends and I decided to go to a house party. We hung out in the dorms for a majority of the evening. Then, at around 10:30, we got dropped off at the address for the house party. It wasn't quite what we were expecting when we thought of a party, but there was enough people there for it to be a good time still. We also knew many people there, so that made it more fun also. The focal point of the party was downstairs in the basement, where there was loud music and drinking games being played. Personally, I wasn't interested in playing any of the drinking games, so the party was a little boring for me, but I stayed downstairs and hung out with my group of friends. Eventually, though, I got really hot and wanted to get out of the basement and grab some fresh air. My plan was to go outside the house for a bit into the cool night, but on my way out, I walked through the upstairs living room area where there was a couple people hanging out on the couches talking. I recognized a girl on the couch in the living room. She sat near me in one of my classes. I decided to go talk to her and say hi. It ended up being a great conversation, and I sat down on the couch with her and we talked for a while about school and other random stuff. It was a refreshing break from the noise and action of the party going on downstairs in the basement. We had been talking for quite a while now, when it came to my attention that a guy sitting on the other couch across the room was staring at me. He wasn't talking to anyone, and there was nobody really by him. He was just sitting and staring. I sneaked glances at this guy during my conversation, and every single time he was locked in on me. I was getting a little weirded out by his intense gaze, so I wrapped up the conversation with my classmate and decided to head back downstairs to my friends. I had reached the top of the stairs heading down into the basement when I felt a cold hand grasp firmly onto the back of my arm. It was the guy from the couch. With no introduction or hello, he simply stated, "Want to go outside and get some air?" It was an unfriendly voice, and I told him no and to please let go of my arm, and he was still grasping onto the back of it. He stared at me for a couple of seconds, and I was afraid he wasn't going to let go. Finally, he slowly released me, and I quickly went downstairs into the life of the party to join up with my friends. At this point, I was ready to go home, back to the dorms, but my friends were still playing games, so we stayed longer. I was scanning the basement looking for someone I knew when I saw the guy from upstairs again. He was standing in the corner of the basement, keeping to himself, and staring once again directly at me. I kept tabs on the creepy guy, making sure that I knew where he was so that I wouldn't get close to him for the rest of the night. I was relieved to say the least when one of my friends notified me that our ride was there and it was time to go. We said our goodbyes and piled into the back seat of our ride's car. As we pulled away from the house, I saw someone watching us through the front window, the curtains pulled open a bit and their head peeking through. It had to have been the guy who was staring at me all night. Thankfully, nobody followed us home that night. The next week in my class, I asked my friend if she knew who the guy was that had been sitting alone in the living room. She said she had no idea, but he had been sitting on the couch the whole night by himself, not associating with anyone. That guy had made my first party experience in college extremely creepy, and I watched out for him for the rest of my time at college, but I never saw him on campus or in any classes either.
I am a senior in college currently. This story happened to me when I was a sophomore. It was the beginning of the second semester of classes. I lived in a pretty standard dorm building at the time. It had 5 floors and a basement. The dorms were pretty old, and the basement was known to be very creepy. The laundry room was down there for kids on the first 2 floors, so I had to use them. One night, I was playing video games in my room and decided to do my laundry. The laundry room was right at the bottom of the stairs and was basically the only room that people used in the basement. The rest of it was just hallways and rooms used as storage, and it was very dark and creepy. I went down, put my stuff in the laundry, and then went back up to set the timer and continue gaming. When my timer went off 40 minutes later, I went back down to get my laundry. But when I arrived in the laundry room, I saw that the washer had been opened and all of my clothes had been thrown around. I was pretty angry about this, and I looked around but didn't see anybody. Then, I heard the sound of laughter coming from outside the room. I walked over to the hallway. It was dark, but I saw a man about 30 feet away down the hall, standing there smiling and laughing, holding one of my socks and waving it around. He had to be at least 40 years old, and he looked completely insane. He started to walk towards me. I turned and went up the stairs. I ran to my RA's room and knocked, but he didn't answer. It was pretty late at night, and I figured he was asleep, so I decided to call the campus police instead. I went to my room and called them, and they said they would have somebody on the way. Just when I hung up, I heard the door to my room jiggle. I went over and looked out the peephole. The man was there. He started banging on my door. I looked around my room to try to find a weapon. Then I heard the noises of people shouting in the hall. I walked over to the door again and saw the man in a struggle with about 2 students. I went out and tried to help them. The man put up a fight, but eventually we were able to overpower him. The police arrived and took him away shortly after. It turned out to be a crazy homeless man that was on drugs. Nobody knows how he was able to sneak into the dorms, though. I'm going to tell you about my scariest memory of college. I went to college about 20 years ago, and this happened during the first semester of my freshman year. It was nighttime, about 9 p.m. I was in my dorm, which had 6 floors of rooms and a few lounges here and there. I lived with my roommate, who was a pretty cool guy, on the first floor. On this night, I had to print a homework assignment, and the only printers were downstairs in the lobby, so I went downstairs to take care of that. When I got down there, I saw a man standing in the doorway. Outside. I noticed he looked much older than most of the college students. That is, until I saw the pizza in his hand and realized that he was a pizza man. It was pretty common for college kids to order pizza to the dorms. He waved at me and I shook my head to say no, I was not there for the pizza. But then he knocked on the door and urged me over. I went to the door and opened it. I told him that I didn't order pizza. He said that was fine, but the kid who ordered had him delivered to his room and he needed to get in the building. I know how strange that sounded looking back, but I was much younger then and I didn't think much of it at the time. He walked away and I went back to printing my assignment. Once I finished, I went back to my room. My roommate and I hung out and played some video games until about 11 when we got tired, so we shut out the lights to go to sleep. I awoke sometime later to the sound of our doorknob being twisted. I was confused and I looked at my roommate's bed to see if it was him. He was still sleeping. I decided to try to ignore the sound and go back to sleep, but it didn't stop. After a few minutes, I started to get concerned. I got out of bed to look out to see who it was. Then I saw it was the pizza man that I had let in the building. I had no idea why he was trying to get in my room. I went over to wake up my roommate. I shook him and he was very confused at first. He sat up and just then our door opened up. The man started to walk in, but looked surprised to see us both awake. My roommate shouted at the man to leave. He responded by saying he wasn't going to and we had to do what he said. Then he showed us a bag he was carrying and told us we did not want to know what he had in there. I took this as some sort of a threat. I didn't know quite what to do. Then my roommate started towards our window, which happened to be open slightly because it was a hot night. He pushed it open farther and jumped out. I saw the man start to pursue, and without even thinking, I followed my roommate out the window. We ran around campus and saw the man chasing after us. We kept going as fast as we could until we found a better lit street and were able to see a campus patrol car. He saw us in a panic and stopped. At this point, the man was gone from chasing us. We explained the situation, and more police were called to the dorm building to look around. After the search, though, the man was not found, and he was able to get away. I felt bad for letting him into the building, but I'm glad nobody got hurt.
This is something that happened back when I was in high school. I'm a female and was a senior during this time. School got out every day at 2:40 p.m. During this time, for about 10 minutes, it would just be crazy on campus. The school was fairly large, and everybody would be scrambling to get out of there. The locker commons and hallways were very crowded, and then everybody would leave the school. But one day, I was able to leave school early. I was in an advanced class during the final period of the day, and it only had about 15 students in it. We had a really big test that day, and that was the only thing that we had. When we finished, our teacher said that if we drove ourselves to school, we could just leave. Most of the time, even if there was nothing to do in class, in high school the teacher would not let you leave until the bell. So this was really nice, and I got done with my test about 10 minutes before the class would normally get out. I left the classroom and then went to my locker. Then I walked out to the parking lot. During this time, I parked in the main students' parking lot, which was at the west end of the school and also sort of behind it. After leaving the school, I was walking to my car, and it was strange to be leaving without tons of other people around. Normally, there was hundreds of kids going to their cars, and there would be a traffic jam to leave campus. But now I could actually take my time. I remember looking around, but when I did, I noticed something a little weird. There was a small wooded area at the back corner of the parking lot behind it, and there was a man standing there to the side of a tree. He was looking in my direction, and he was wearing sunglasses. It looked pretty strange, because it seemed like he was coming out of the woods. The guy was too old to be a student as well. I looked back to him, and he then moved behind a tree and out of my sight. I continued to my car and then got inside and drove home. I didn't think much more about it after that. But the next day after school, I was walking to my car again. This time, I left school at the normal time with everybody else, and there were tons of other people around. When I was walking to my car, for some reason, I happened to remember the previous day and seeing the weird guy in the woods. Maybe it was just because I was walking to my car again, but I decided to look over to the woods once more, thinking there was no chance that the guy would be there again. But he actually was. The same guy was in the same exact spot, and it was really hard to notice him or see him at all unless you were looking for him. He was halfway behind a tree. I was wondering who on earth this guy was and what he was doing. I kept looking at him as I walked to my car, and the guy seemed to actually be looking at me. Soon, though, he disappeared behind a tree again. After that, I continued to my car and drove home. It was really strange, but I didn't think too much more about it until the next day. This time, when I was leaving school, I knew to look to the spot, but I didn't see the guy this time. He was not there like he had been the last couple of days. The next strange thing to happen was when I left school to drive home, maybe 2 days after that. I was driving back and noticed that this one car followed me almost the entire time. I didn't notice it until maybe about halfway. There was a smaller black sedan that was driving behind me, not really close or anything, but the car did stick with me going into the area where I live, which was normally very quiet. I lived in a large neighborhood, but it was also a very quiet neighborhood. I had to make several turns in the very residential area, and we were the only 2 cars on the road. I looked back and noticed that the driver was wearing sunglasses. Could this be the same man? I didn't know, but it did seem strange. At my street, I turned onto it, and so did the car following me. I wasn't sure what to do at the time. I just drove to my house and pulled into the driveway. Luckily, the car did not pull in after me, and it kept going. I was very relieved. I went inside after that. For the next few hours, things went by pretty normally. That evening, though, I was in my bedroom sitting at my desk. There was a window in my bedroom which looked out to the front yard and to the street. I remember noticing that there was a guy walking down the street. It didn't take long until I recognized him. He was wearing sunglasses, and it appeared to be the same man who was at my school and probably followed me home. He was slowly walking sort of down our street, and I noticed him looking in the direction of our house. When I realized this, I left my bedroom and found my parents in the living room. I told them the whole story of everything. They went to look out of a front window after that. Now at this point, I expected the man to be long gone, but when we looked out of the window, he was actually still in sight. He was walking by, now on the other side of the street, very slowly. My dad then left the house and started walking over to the guy. I couldn't hear what was being said, but it sounded like my dad was yelling at the man. And then I saw the guy start sprinting away. He went down the street and out of sight. My dad came back in after that and said that the guy got away from him. After that, the man did not come back towards our house again, and I never saw him at the school either. But I did report him to my school counselor, so if the guy ever returned, he probably would be caught. I really don't know who he was, but I'm glad that I saw him out of my window that night, or who knows what would have happened. In college, I was living in an old dormitory. It was one of those buildings that had been around for ages, full of creaky floors and strange noises. I shared a room with a guy named Dave. We were both normal students just trying to get by. One night, about 2 weeks into the semester, I was working late on a paper. Dave had gone to bed early and the room was quiet. The only sound was the soft hum of the old radiator. Around midnight, I heard a faint tapping noise coming from the window. It was a little odd because the window was old and didn't close properly, but the tapping was rhythmic and consistent. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just the wind or something, but it kept going. Tap, tap, tap. It was starting to get on my nerves, so I went over to the window to check it out. I pulled back the curtain and looked out into the dark courtyard below. There was nothing there. The tapping had stopped as soon as I looked outside. I shrugged it off and went back to my desk. After about 10 minutes, the tapping started again. This time, it seemed to be coming from inside the room. I glanced around, but saw nothing unusual, and Dave was still asleep, snoring lightly. The tapping continued sporadically for the next hour or so, starting and stopping without any clear pattern. I tried to focus on my paper, but the noise was making it hard to concentrate. Finally, I decided to just go to bed and deal with it in the morning. The next day, I asked Dave if he had heard anything strange the night before. He looked at me funny and said no. I thought maybe I was just imagining things, or that it was some sort of stress-related issue, but it wasn't until a few days later when it got really weird. That same week, our dorm had a fire drill in the middle of the night. Everyone was groggy and annoyed, but we went outside and stood in the cold while they checked things out. As we were waiting, I noticed that some of the students were talking about a rumor going around. They said that our dorm used to be a hospital, and there were stories about it being haunted. I didn't believe in ghosts, but the tapping was starting to creep me out. A few nights after the fire drill, the tapping came back, this time more insistent, like something was trying to get in. I was alone in the room that night because Dave had gone out for the evening. The tapping was loud enough now that I could hear it clearly, even over the hum of the radiator. I went to the window again and saw nothing outside. I looked around the room and checked the closet and under the bed, but everything seemed normal. I tried to ignore it, but the tapping wouldn't stop. It was getting harder to concentrate on anything else, so I decided to call Dave to see if he could come back early. He answered and said that he was on his way. While I waited, the tapping grew louder and more frantic. It sounded like it was coming from the walls or maybe the ceiling, and I was really starting to get scared. When Dave got back, he said he didn't hear anything unusual. We stayed up for a while, talking and trying to distract ourselves. The tapping eventually stopped, and we went to bed. The next day, I found out that Dave had heard the same thing, but he didn't tell me because he thought it would freak me out more. That night, we both heard the tapping again, but this time it was different. It was more like scratching, and it was coming from multiple directions. We couldn't figure out where it was coming from. It seemed to come from the walls, the floor, and the ceiling all at once. We were both too scared to sleep, so we stayed up talking about it and trying to find a logical explanation. After a few more nights of the same unsettling noises, we decided to get some help. We talked to the dorm resident advisor, but she just brushed it off as old building noises. We tried to explain that it wasn't just the usual creaks and groans. She promised to send someone to check, but nothing ever changed. The tapping continued for the rest of the semester, though it seemed to get quieter after a while. It was as if whatever was making the noise had gotten tired or bored. We never found out what caused it, although some of the other students mentioned hearing similar things, but no one really talked about it much. When the semester ended, Dave and I moved out of the dorm and into an apartment off campus. The tapping stopped completely. We both agreed that whatever was happening was tied to that old building. Even now, when I think back on it, I still get a chill. I don't know if it was something supernatural or just the result of an old, creaky building, but the fact that nobody could explain it and it stopped as soon as we left still makes me uneasy. I often wonder if the next person who moved into that dorm heard the same thing. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. It's one of those mysteries that will probably never be solved, but I'll always remember those nights and the strange noises that kept me awake. For some background, I'm a female and was a junior in high school at the time of this story. The school I went to was fairly large and had lots of other students. I would say that I had a decent amount of other friends, and my locker was near several of them. Each grade kind of had their lockers together in a certain area. The juniors were in a large locker common area near the science department. It was sort of at one end of the school. So the story really begins one day when I was at my locker in between classes. None of my friends were really around at that time, and there was a little space between me and everybody else. It would get extremely crowded during some times of the day there, so much so that it was hard to even open the lockers sometimes. It was nice that it wasn't busy this time, but then I noticed that there was this guy standing near my locker. I had never seen him before, and wasn't sure where he had come from. I assumed that he was a senior because he looked older. He approached me when I was at my locker and said hi. Then he proceeded to start a conversation with me. He asked me to skip class and leave school with him, saying we could hang out. Now, I didn't even know this guy, and I took school very serious, so I did not want to skip. I told him no, I had to go to class, and I said that he should do the same. He asked me to hang out with him after school then, and I said no, I was busy. I really did not want to hang out with him at all and was not interested. I then left the guy and said that I had to go to class now. He was still at my locker when I walked away. For the rest of that school day, I didn't see him, but the next day, he was back. I got done with the class and went to my locker only to find him there. He was standing right in front of it, kind of blocking it from me. I asked him to move, and he started asking to hang out again. He knew my name somehow, and I kept telling him that I didn't want to hang out. Luckily, this time, some of my friends were around. When he didn't move, several of them asked him, and he finally did. After he left, I asked my friends who he was, and none of them knew anything about him. We all just assumed that he was a senior, and I just hoped that he would leave me alone. Well, later that day, after school, I was stopping at my locker before going home. When I did, the same guy was there. This time, he asked if I needed a ride home, and of course, I said no. I drove to and from school every day. He tried convincing me, but I just walked away from him. Then I left school. Now, after this, I did not see him for a while, but I found out that he did not even go to our school. Apparently, he had tried getting several other girls to hang out with him as well. One of them reported him for harassment after he apparently followed her into a restroom. That's when they found out he wasn't a student. Nobody really knew who he was until like a week or two later. One of my friends showed me this news story online. It was of an attempted kidnapping of a local woman, which luckily the woman got away. The man was caught, and I saw that it was the same guy. It turns out he was 23 and not even in high school at all. No wonder he looked older. I really couldn't believe it, and I feel grateful that everybody ended up being all right and that the man was caught. This is back when I was a high school freshman. I remember that during this time, I would get a ride to school with my older brother, who was a senior. We both played sports, but different ones. So one day, maybe a couple of months into the school year, we both had practice, but mine was early after school, and my brother's was later. When my practice got done that day, it was probably like 5 p.m., and my brother's practice was still going. All my teammates left, except for one. One of my good friends on the team, Jack, was in a similar situation. His brother was also practicing. We sat around and were talking outside of the gym areas for a while. Then we got bored and decided to walk around. School had been done for hours, so at this point, everybody was gone and the place was almost completely empty. We started just talking and walking around random hallways, just kind of wandering around. We were both freshmen and still fairly new to the school, but knew most of the place pretty well. I remember after walking around for a while, we found this staircase that neither of us knew about. It was in an older wing of the school, and there were doors in front of the stairway, but one of the doors was open. We were both curious, so we walked inside and started going down the stairs. They led to, I guess, what was the basement of the school. I wasn't even aware that the school had a basement. At the time, I was thinking it probably wasn't used for anything except maybe storage. When we both got down there, it was really dark. Most of the lights were off, but we found this one switch and a few lights to the hallway turned on. It was basically just one hallway with a few rooms in it. We walked down it and were just looking around. I think we were both just surprised that we even had a basement in our school. We were talking to each other and just looking around, when towards the end of the hallway, we heard a door open. This really startled us, because we had no idea that anybody else was down here. I mean, all the lights had been off, and this place didn't really seem like it was in use. The next thing that I knew, this guy walked out from a room and into the hallway. We both didn't know who this guy was and did not recognize him. He clearly did not work for the school. He was wearing nothing that would indicate that he was a custodian either. The guy had really short hair and was wearing a t-shirt and jeans. He looked out at us, but did not say anything. Then, after us both staring at each other for a few moments, the man started walking in our direction. The way that he was walking was sort of aggressive, if that makes any sense. As he was approaching, he told us to come to him. We both had a bad feeling about it though, and just turned around and quickly went back upstairs. After we had made it to the top, we both went away from that hallway. The man did not come upstairs and remained in the basement. We continued to walk far away. For the next 20 minutes or so, we walked up and down random empty hallways and talked about what had happened. Soon though, we got curious and decided to head back, not to go into the basement, but just to see into the hallway. When we returned, both of the doors leading to the basement were shut. I actually tried to open one, but it wouldn't open and seemed to be locked. We then walked away and headed back over towards the gyms. We then waited there until our brothers were done with practice. After that happened, I wondered who the guy was and what he was doing down there. I never saw him again. I also wasn't aware of the basement area being in any sort of use to the school during my entire time there, and I never went back down there again. Last semester at college, I had a scary encounter in the library of all places. It was towards the end of the semester, only about 2 weeks left of school before finals week, and I was getting hit hard with assignments and tests that I needed to study for. Normally, I would do my assignments at home in my room, but the stuff I needed to complete was really piling on recently. I had started going to the campus library to do my studying and homework. I had gone a couple of times now, and gotten into a groove of going a few nights every week and staying for most of the night. It was actually quite nice the way the library was set up. The first floor looked like your classic library with tons of bookshelves and books. However, the second floor was just a maze of hallways with a bunch of side rooms that students could rent out and study in. All the rooms would be locked, but all I had to do was show my student ID at the front desk, and I'd receive a key and get a study room all to myself. On this particular Wednesday night, I got myself a room key and went upstairs to find my room number. I walked through the hallways looking for my room number and eventually found it towards the back of the second floor. I got my laptop and everything else I needed set up and then went to work. I'd been working away on homework for many hours now, and it was almost 10 p.m. The library closed at 11, so I knew I had a bit of time to do a little bit more homework. However, I needed a bathroom break first. I made my way down the hallways towards the bathroom that was on the second floor. When I had arrived at the library, some of the other study rooms had been filled with other students studying, but they were all empty and dark now. It appeared that I was the only one left, at least on this floor of the library. Finished with my bathroom break, I made my way back towards my study room. When I turned the corner and saw my study room, something was wrong. I had left the door open and unlocked because I was only going to use the bathroom and didn't want to bring the key with me, so that wasn't out of the ordinary. However, when I had left, I definitely had left the light on. Through the window, I could see that all the lights were off in the study room, and it was filled with darkness. I stood outside the door to my study room, wondering what to do next. I had most definitely left the lights on, but perhaps they were motion sensor lights and had turned off already. I wasn't really sure. I cautiously poked my head into the room, fumbling for the light switch on the wall. Finally finding it, I flicked it on, illuminating the study room. I scanned the room to see if anyone was in there, but it was empty, and I looked at my personal items, and it appeared that nothing had been stolen or tampered with. The only thing I saw was on the back wall, written on the whiteboard with dry erase marker, was 2 words. It said, "Watching you." I got chills as I read that, going over to lock the door to my study room. I also looked through the window out into the hallway and other study rooms nearby to see if anyone was there. I barely knew how to comprehend what had just happened. Had somebody been watching me while in the library, or watching me outside of the library as well? Regardless, I was extremely nervous, and I wanted to pack up and go home for the night. I normally walked from my house to the library, but there was no shot I was doing that tonight. I called the campus safety officers and asked if I could get a ride home from the library. For the final 2 weeks of the semester, I didn't study at the library and was always looking over my shoulder. I never noticed anyone who seemed to be watching me, and didn't have any more encounters like that over the last 2 weeks that I was at school. I used to walk to and from school every day. This was when I was in high school, and during my freshman and sophomore years. Obviously, I didn't have my driver's license yet, but I also didn't like to ride the bus. We luckily lived close enough that I could walk to school, and we lived in a warmer climate where the winters were very mild. It would take me about 15 minutes to walk to the school, and I had no problem with it at all. We lived in a residential neighborhood, and I would take a couple of sidewalks to the high school. That was basically it. Most days, I would walk all by myself, and at 7 o'clock in the morning, things were very quiet. The roads were not very busy either, other than the occasional car passing by. One morning, I was walking to school like any other day. I would say that I was about halfway there when I heard a vehicle approaching. To this point, there had been maybe a few cars here and there driving by, but I didn't really notice. So this car I did notice, because it started driving closer to me and slow, like it was going to pull over. And then surprisingly, it did pull over. I looked over to the car, wondering who it was. The window rolled down, and there was a man behind the wheel. He asked me if I could use a lift to class. Clearly, I knew better than to get a ride from a stranger, and I said no. The man said something like it was probably a really long walk, but I still said no thanks. At that point, he did drive away. I walked the rest of the way, wondering if the man could have been dangerous, or if he was just trying to be nice. He should know better, though, than to offer random high school kids rides. So after school that day, I was walking home. This was the very same day. So I was by myself on the sidewalk, and when I was nearing my neighborhood, but still a few minutes away, a car approached again. I didn't really think to notice if it was the same one, but I soon realized that it was. The car slowed down and went about as slow as I was walking. Once more, a man rolled down the window, and when I looked, I noticed that it was the same guy. He then asked me if I needed a ride. I told him no again, I did not need a ride. He said okay, and then drove off. I really couldn't believe that the guy had tried to get me to go into his car before and after school. Obviously, I was hoping that I would never see him again, but that was not the case. The very next morning, I was walking to school. Now, looking back, it's easy to say that I should have told somebody, and I should have took more precautions, But for some reason, being a young high schooler, I thought the man would not be back. I figured he would have gotten the hint, and the previous day would probably be the only day that I would see him. So as I walked to school on this morning, I was about halfway there, and I saw a car pass me by, which looked like the man's car. I got a bad feeling. The car passed me though, and for a moment I felt relieved. But then the car pulled over to the side of the road, about 40 or 50 feet in front of me. And this time, it completely pulled over. It stopped, and it looked like the engine was turning off. I had a terrible feeling. It seemed as though the man may get out. So I quickly turned and went into a random person's front yard. The sun was still sort of rising, so it was mostly dark out. I then went into the neighbor's backyard, and then cut through a few more properties. I knew the area really well, and I continued to cut through more people's yards and take random streets. I was able to make it all the way to school like that, and did not see the man or his car for the rest of the way. When I got to school, I called my mom and told her about it, and I also told all my school friends throughout the day. Everybody was concerned for me, and said that I should not walk home that day. My mom was working, and offered to leave her job early, but I was able to get a ride with my friend Amanda. So after school, I rode on Amanda's bus with her and went to her house. The bus didn't go to my house at all, because we had told the school that I was not going to be using it, so I wasn't assigned to a bus at all. So my mom picked me up from Amanda's, and then we contacted the school so I could be on a bus. After that, I rode the bus to and from school every day for the rest of the semester. Then I was able to get my driver's license and drove to school for the rest of my high school career. Luckily, I never saw that man again. I never thought much of getting randomly paired with a college roommate. I figured we'd be friendly, share some laughs, and maybe argue over something small, but nothing out of the ordinary. But when I moved into the dorm, I was paired with a girl named Emily, and from the start, things felt off. Emily was quiet, not in a shy way, but in a way that made you wonder if she had something to hide. She didn't go out much, and when she did, she'd be back in no time. She kept to herself and barely spoke to me. I tried to be friendly, but she only gave short, one-word answers. Over time, I started to avoid her as much as possible. I felt bad about it, but it was just easier that way. One evening, I was studying in our room when Emily came in looking more upset than usual. She threw her bag on the bed and sat down heavily. I tried to ignore her, but she was pacing back and forth. "You okay?" I asked, though I didn't really expect an answer. "Yeah, just a lot on my mind," she said. Then she fell silent again. That night, as I was about to fall asleep, I heard Emily's bed creaking. I looked at the clock. It was past 2 a.m. I tried to ignore it, thinking she was just restless, but then I heard a soft, rhythmic thumping sound. It was irregular, like something heavy was being moved around. Curiosity got the better of me. I got up and peeked out of my bed. Emily's bed was moving slightly with each thump, and I saw her silhouette through the thin partition that separated our beds. She was sitting up, her head bent forward. I was too tired and scared to investigate further, so I just went back to bed. The next morning, Emily was already gone when I woke up. I didn't think much of it until the day after. I was sitting at my desk when I noticed something odd. The drawer of the nightstand next to Emily's bed was slightly open, and I could see a piece of paper sticking out. I pulled it out and found a list of names and dates written in Emily's handwriting. It didn't make sense at first, but then I realized they were names of students in our dorm, and the dates were all recent. I started to feel uneasy. I didn't know why Emily would have a list like this, and I didn't want to confront her about it. A few days later, the list was gone, and Emily acted like nothing had happened. As the days went on, Emily started acting even weirder than normal. I started noticing that Emily was always home, even when she said she'd be out. I'd come back from class, and her door would be closed, but I could hear her muffled noises from inside. It sounded like she was talking, or maybe arguing with someone, but I never saw anyone else come or go. One night, after several days of this strange behavior, I was coming back from a late study session. As I approached our room, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. I could hear Emily's voice, but this time it was clear. She was talking, loudly and angrily. Her door was cracked open, and I could see her in the room. She was standing by the window, her back to me. She was talking to herself, but the way she was moving, it was like she was addressing someone else. I couldn't make out what she was saying, but it sounded intense. I didn't want to intrude too much, so I quietly closed the door and went into the common area. The next morning, Emily was gone again. I took the opportunity to look around her side of the room. I felt a little guilty about snooping, but she was acting so weird lately that I wanted to see if I could get a clue as to what was going on. I didn't find much, just a few personal items and the empty drawer where the list had been. But there was something else. Underneath her bed, I found a small old-fashioned key. It didn't look like it belonged to any of the dorm rooms. I put it back where I found it and decided to stay away from her side of the room. Days went by, and Emily's behavior grew even more erratic. One evening, as I was studying late, I saw her from the corner of my eye, walking around the dorm with that strange, intense look on her face. She had a heavy bag with her, and she seemed to be looking for something or someone. I tried to avoid her, but she noticed me and gave me a cold stare before quickly disappearing down the hallway. Things reached a tipping point one night. I was awoken by a loud banging sound coming from Emily's side of the room. I hesitated, but decided to check it out. When I opened the door, the room was dark, and Emily was nowhere to be seen. Her bed was a mess, and the room looked like it had been ransacked. I went to the common area and saw Emily sitting alone, her head in her hands. She looked up when I approached and had tears in her eyes. "Are you all right?" I asked, trying to be supportive despite my own fear. She nodded but didn't say anything, so I decided not to press further. The next day, Emily was gone. Her things were packed up, and a note was left on her desk saying she was leaving for personal reasons and wouldn't be coming back. I never saw Emily again, and I later found out that she had transferred out of the college. I still don't know what was going on with her, but the whole experience left me shaken. I learned to be more careful about who I lived with and trust my instincts. Sometimes I wonder if I will ever know the real story behind Emily's strange behavior and that unsettling list of names. Everything about the girl just seemed very strange and mysterious.